have a CSS rule here. Okay, so we have a CSS rule which is made up of a selector and a declaration block. So selector is pointing to the HTML element that you want to style, and then the declaration block contains one or more declarations separated by a semicolon. And then each declaration is made up of a property and a value separated by a colon. You can see here we have font size being the property, and then full colon, and then 24 pixels being the value. Color here is the property, and then full colon, and crimson is the value. Okay, and that is saying here, each declaration includes a CSS property and a value separated by a colon. So each declaration here, you can see the declaration font size 24 pixels, that is a declaration. It is made up of property, font size, and then a value 24 pixels, each separated by a colon. And then multiple declarations are separated with semicolons. Here we've already seen that. So font size 24 pixels, the whole of that is a declaration. Color crimson, the whole of that is a declaration. And as you can see, they're being separated by a full colon. Okay, sorry, they're being separated by a semicolon. They're being separated by a semicolon. And of course, yeah, we've seen that multiple declarations are separated with semicolon. Declaration blocks are surrounded by curly braces. So you can see a declaration block surrounded by curly braces. And by the way, we're going to see that in a short while. Now, the whole of this, whatever you are seeing here, the whole of it is what we refer to as a CSS rule. And that is basically the syntax for CSS. Okay, that's all you need to understand as far as the syntax of CSS is concerned. Of course, there are other things we're going to look at as time goes by, as far as the syntax is concerned. But for now, this is the primary syntax of CSS. H3, as you can see, our declaration block being surrounded here by curly braces, and the declaration block is made up of one or more declarations separated by a semicolon, and then each declaration is made up of a property and a value, a property and a value. So we're going to write a lot of CSS, and by the time we finish with this CSS, you know, this is going to be a second nature to you. You'll be basically writing CSS with your eyes closed. Okay. So for now, just understand that this is the CSS syntax made up of a selector and a declaration block, whereby the selector points to the HTML elements that you to the HTML element that we want to style, and then the declaration block is now where the meat is. Okay, it's made up of various declarations, one or more declarations, each separated by a semicolon, and then each declaration is made up of a property and a value, a property and a value. So that is it about it. And, I want us now to start writing CSS. And for you to write CSS, for you to write any CSS, you need some sort of an HTML document, because remember, CSS exists because of HTML. Without HTML, CSS is useless. Okay. So for you to write any CSS, definitely, you need some HTML somewhere. So that is what we want to start by doing. So I'll jump here to my Windows Explorer here, and I want to create here a new folder. I'll just call this folder here CSS Learning. Okay, so I'm calling this folder here CSS Learning, and I'm going to open this folder here in Visual Studio Code. So let me now show you a new way to open a folder inside of Visual Studio Code. So you'll just open your terminal or your command prompt from that particular directory. So if you want, you can right click and then select open in terminal. Okay, that is far much easier. So for those of us who are using Windows, Mac and Linux, you can do that. And for those of us in Windows, you can also type here CMD and press enter, and your command line interface is going to open from that particular directory. So because we've been doing this too much, let us today open it in terminal. So right click and then select open in terminal. And as you can see here now, our command line interface is pointing to this CSS Learning. Now, if you want to open Visual Studio Code from this particular directory, you are going to use code. Okay. So by the way, before I even do this, if you want to open Visual Studio Code from your, is that a question or a concern? You know, basically when I hear somebody whispering, I'm usually assuming maybe my screen cannot be seen or somebody's trying to ask a question. Okay. So what I was trying to say is this. If you want to open Visual Studio Code from anywhere, you can open your command prompt. It doesn't have to be from that particular directory. And then what you do, you type code and then the path to the directory that you want to open. So code, and then the path to the directory that you want to open. By the way, this has nothing to do with CSS, okay? This has nothing to do with CSS. In fact, you don't even need to understand it. I'm just trying to show you guys that way as time goes by, you will be able to move faster. So this has nothing to do with CSS. This is just a Visual Studio Code thing. So if you want to open Visual Studio Code from your terminal, you just type code, and then you supply the path to where your folder is. Okay, you supply the path to where your folder is. So for example, in this case, I can just click here and then copy this path over here. You can see C, users, O2M, documents, T2G, CSS learning. By the way, guys, this is what we refer to as a path. When you hear somebody saying path in computing, let me just type it here, path. When you hear somebody saying path, when it comes to the terminal or the command line or anything computing, this is basically what they mean. Okay, so our CSS learning folder is in the teach to give folder, and then this T2G folder is in the documents folder, and the documents folder is in this user here called Otoma, okay, and so on and so forth. So let me just copy this. Okay, sorry for that. Let me just copy that path, and I can type here code, and then basically paste that particular path. C, users, Otoma, documents, T2G, CSS learning. And when I press enter, Visual Studio Code is going to open from that particular directory. So if we give it a few seconds, you can see here, CSS learning. Okay, and if you don't believe me, if I open the terminal here, inside of Visual Studio Code, we've been doing this all the time, you will see it is pointing to exactly that particular path. Okay, let me try to do this again. If, let's say, I want to open the desktop folder from Visual Studio Code, all I'm supposed to do is to click on the desktop like that, and then copy this path. Okay, will that really work? It usually wants a full path. Okay, maybe we can open, let's say, this class notes directory here. So you copy this URL like that. So I want you to see that the class notes directory has C# and Tinkercad docs. So I'm copying this path over here. I'm copying the path there, and then I to type here code, and then that particular path. C, users, Otoma, desktop, and then class. When I press enter, it is going to open that particular folder in Visual Studio Code. And as you can see, here we go. So let me just select yes, I trust the authors. And as you can see here, we have that C# directory and this Tinkercad docs directory. By the way, when I say directory and folder, it's one and the same thing. Okay, so in Linux, they call it a directory, but in Windows, we call it a folder. I mean, in Linux and Mac, they call it a directory, but in Windows, we usually call it a folder. So let us do this one more time. Maybe let's say I want to open something in the what? Maybe still in the desktop. Maybe still in the desktop. Let's say I want to open this my first C#. Okay, so let's say I want to open this my first C#. So again, what I'm supposed to do is to copy this path over here. So find a way to copy the path to that particular directory, and then we use the same command code, and then the same URL, and press enter. So when I press enter, you'll see it's going to open Visual Studio Code from that particular folder, or rather from that particular directory. So that's very straightforward, and I hope you guys are now getting the idea of what is happening. Now, there's another trick I'm going to show you guys. So when it comes to working with the terminal, a dot usually means the current directory. So let me just go here to documents, T2G, just a second, and then CSS learning. So I'm going to open this from the terminal. So open in terminal. So when it comes to working with the terminal, whenever you see somebody doing a dot, it usually means the current folder. Okay, whenever you see somebody doing a dot like this, it usually means the current folder. So when I do code and then space and then dot, I'm basically trying to say open the current folder with Visual Studio Code. It's as simple as that. So when you do code space dot, not just in Visual Studio Code, but this is a general terminal thing. It works for both Windows and Linux and Mac. Okay, so when you do code space and then period, you're basically, this period usually means the current directory, or rather the current folder. Again, directory and folder, it's one and the same thing. Of course, in Mac and Linux, they call that a directory, but in Windows, we call it a folder. So when you do code space and then a dot like this, you're basically trying to tell the terminal to open Visual Studio Code from the current directory. And press enter here, exactly that is going to happen. You can see Visual Studio opens from the current directory. So here goes our CSS learning. So let us now create our HTML file. Index.html. Remember, we said this one here is compulsory. You must have an index.html file. And for some reason, it's a bit slow. Okay, we're good to go. And then, of course, we use emmet to generate the string code. So you can just type here CSS learning, and then maybe just here a heading 1, but CSS learning. Very simple and very straightforward. And then I'll go back here to our folder, and you can see here's our index.html, and then double click on it to open it. And here we go. So of course, up until that point, there is nothing new, only this VS Code command that I was showing you guys. Okay, so that is it about it. So we now know what is CSS, and we know the basic CSS syntax. Okay, not the basic CSS syntax, but the primary CSS syntax, what you'll be writing all the time whenever you're working with CSS. Now let us look at how we add CSS to HTML. Now there are 3 main ways to include CSS in HTML, and these are those 3 ways. The first way is inline CSS, the second way is internal CSS, and the third and the most preferred way by almost everyone is external CSS. So we have 3 main ways to include CSS in HTML. The first one is inline CSS, the second one is internal CSS, and the third one is external CSS. Now let us look at the first one here, which is inline CSS. So inline CSS applies style directly to an HTML element using the style attribute within the opening tags of that particular element. And you guys saw us doing this yesterday. So inline CSS applies styles directly to an HTML element using the style attribute, as you can see, using the style attribute within the opening tag of the HTML element. Is that a question? Okay, so as you can see here, for example, we have this heading 1, and you can see we are trying to apply inline CSS. And how are we doing it? We are using the style attribute is equal to, and now you guys know about the declarations. So you can see here's a declaration, font size 24 pixels, and then another declaration, color crimson. And then each declaration is made up of a property and a value, a CSS property and a CSS value. So I will jump here back to my VS Code, and let us look at that in practice. So we said we are supposed to use the style attribute like that for us to do inline CSS. So style is equal to, and then now we are supposed to provide our declarations. Of course, each of those declarations is supposed to be separated by a semicolon. And remember, each declaration is made up of a property and a value, and each property and value is separated by a colon. So I'm about to use a CSS property that you guys don't know about yet, but we are going to learn about it in a short while. So if I want to change the size of this heading 1 over here, I'm going to use font size and then give here a value in pixels. I can say, for example, 90 pixels, like that. So that is a declaration. And then I'm going to save this, and then jumping back here to to my browser and refreshing it, you'll now see the size of that particular text has changed. Okay, and if you don't believe me, we can even try to make it something very crazy, maybe 190 pixels. Of course, that is beyond crazy actually, but of course, anything for you guys to learn. And when I refresh it, you can see we have this massive text here that is 190 pixels in size. Okay, so font size 190 pixels. So I want to add another declaration to change the color of this text. So because I want to add another declaration, I'm going to use a semicolon. Okay, a semicolon, and then the next declaration, in this case color, okay, that is the property, and then the value after a full colon, crimson. So save that, so color crimson, and when I jump back here and refresh it, you can see the color changes from black to something else, in this case crimson. Okay, so that is inline CSS. Now, before we continue, there is a way we can preview our website here. There is a way we can preview our website inside of Visual Studio Code, and that is through an extension. Okay, I don't know if I can remember the extension, but I think it's called Live Preview. So just a second. Of course, the internet is weak, but if this loads successfully, there is an extension, I believe it's called Live Preview, which you can use to preview our web page within VS Code. Let us see. Live Preview. Yeah, exactly. I think this is the one. So let us install it. Okay. And as you can see, it's not yet stable. You can even see Microsoft is marking it as a preview. But as you can see, it's already being used by, sorry for that. As you can see, it's already being used by over 10 million developers out there. Okay, not really by over 10 million developers. This is the number of downloads. Doesn't mean we have 10 million developers using it. Okay, because each time you download it, it's being counted, even if you download it 3 times. That is being counted. So let us wait for it to install, and then once that installation is complete, I'm going to show you how this works. But basically, you guys have now seen, this is what we refer to as inline CSS. Okay, so this is inline CSS. As you can see, we are applying CSS using the style attribute within the opening tag of our HTML element here. Irene, please mute yourself. Okay, so that was inline CSS. You basically apply CSS. Inline CSS applies styles directly to an HTML element using the style attribute within the opening tag of that particular element. Okay, so that is what inline CSS does. It applies styles directly to an HTML element using the style attribute within the opening tag of the element, and that is exactly what you have seen here. So let us look at the next one here, which is internal CSS. So internal CSS is defined within a style block inside the head section of the HTML document. Okay, and this internal CSS is what we usually use when you want to apply styles to elements within the same page. Okay, we are going to discuss that as time goes by. So for now, just know that internal CSS is defined within a style block inside the head section of the HTML document. And now, when we start using this internal CSS and external CSS, we now go full syntax, or I mean, we go full CSS syntax, both the declaration block and the selector. As you can see, in inline CSS, you're not really following, for example, the selector and the declaration block syntax. But from internal CSS all the way to external CSS, we will be following that particular syntax. So in fact, let us just do it. I don't know if this live preview has finished installing. Yeah, actually it has installed. So if I want to preview it, so I have installed that live preview extension. So if I want to preview my HTML from Visual Studio Code, I'll just right click on it and then select show preview. So when I click here on show preview, you'll see here to the side that our web page is going to be loaded. Okay, so I can change here the font size to, let's say, I don't know, why does this keep doing that? So I can change the font size here to something like, let's say, 40 pixels. And as you can see, we see the preview directly in our Visual Studio Code. So that is the live preview extension. You can use it to basically see the preview of your HTML document. Now, the next one, the next way to include CSS, as you have seen, is internal CSS. So this is the inline CSS. The next one is internal CSS. And we have said with internal CSS, we write our CSS within the style tags in the opening, sorry, not in the opening, but in the head section of our HTML document. So you can see this is the head section of our HTML document. And here I'm opening and closing the style tag. So by now you know the syntax for CSS, the selector and the declaration block, and that is exactly what you're going to do within these style tags over here. So let us have here, for example, a heading 2. Okay, I'm going to have here a heading 2, which says CSS is fun. So we start with a selector. So I'm going to start here with our selector here, our heading 2, to select our H2 element here. Then after the selector, remember, you're supposed to move to the declaration block. So the declaration block is surrounded by curly braces. And then here, we provide our property, sorry, our declarations, of which our declarations are made up of a property, a full colon, and a value. So for example, if I want to change the font size of this particular text here, CSS is fun, I'm going to have here font size, let's say 56 pixels. And as you can see, the font size has been increased. If you don't believe, you can just try to go crazy as we've been doing. maybe 556 pixels, and now we have a very massive text here. CSS is fun. Okay, so 556 pixels, of course, that is a bit unrealistic. Let us just go with 56 pixels. And then we can also change its color. Maybe we can have here something like a color, let's say green. And as you can see, the color green is working perfectly fine. So now you guys, you can see the syntax. See, we have our selector heading 2, and then the declaration block. Okay, so the declaration block, as you can see, it's surrounded by these curly braces, and the declaration block is made up of several declarations. I mean, one or more declarations. You can see here we have the first declaration, font size 56 pixels, and then the other declaration, color property set to green. And then in each of this declaration, you can see we have a property, font size is a property, and color is a property. And then we have a value, 56 pixel is a value, and then green is a value. And the property and the value, as you can see in the declaration, they are being separated by a full colon. So we have our full colon here separating font size 56 pixels and then color green. And as you can see, that is working 100% perfectly fine. Okay, so this is internal CSS. As you can see, we are using the style tags within the head section of our HTML element. And usually, guys, to clean up your CSS, we usually have each of these declaration on its own line. So font size 56 pixel on its own line, and then color green on its own line, and then this closing curly brace here on its own line. So this is how we usually write CSS to make it even cleaner. Because you can imagine if this heading 2, for example, is going to have multiple stylings, then it doesn't make sense to have all of those declarations on the same line. But I hope now, up until this point, this is making sense. So that is internal CSS. And then finally, let us look at external CSS. So when it comes to external CSS, it involves writing styles in a separate .css file. So you will write your styles in a separate .css file and then link that particular file to the HTML document using the link tag in the head section. So yesterday we said that one of the uses of this head section in HTML is to link external resources. And we also saw how to link one of the resources yesterday, which was the favicon. So another resource we're going to link today in the head section is the CSS file. It's a CSS file, of course. Okay. So here, just a second, you can have your file here. So the same way, for example, our HTML file ends with .html. You can call your file whatever you want to call it. You can call it dad, you can call it mom, you can call it index, you can call it style, whatever you want to call it. Just make sure it ends with .css. Okay, call your file whatever you want to call it, and just make sure it ends with .css. And there's no special naming convention here. You don't need to have an index.css as equivalent to index.html. You don't really need to have that. Just call your CSS file whatever you want to call it. But 99% of the times you'll see people calling it style.css. Okay, so just call it whatever you want, but make sure it ends with .css. But what you'll see people do oftentimes is to call it style.css. Now, how do we, okay, for example, let us just have here heading 3. Okay, we can have here a heading 3. Okay, and then let us just have here, let us have it read external CSS. And as you can see here in our preview, it is reading external CSS. So now, I'm going to save this file and let us try to style this heading 3 here. So our heading 3, of course, the selector, and then the declaration block. So I can have here, for example, font size 80 pixels, and then maybe color, something like purple. Okay, just to make it different from the others. But as you can see, the style is not being applied. So for the style to be applied in the HTML, you must link this CSS file in your HTML document. And how do you do that? It's actually very simple. So in the head section of your HTML element, of your HTML document, in the head section here, you're going to use the link tag. You're going to use the link tag. And to this link tag, you are going to provide 2 attributes here. So you're going to provide the rel attribute and the href attribute. So yesterday, when it was for the favicon, we used icon in the rel here, in the rel. Okay, so when it was a favicon, we used icon in the rel. But now because you want to link a CSS file, the rel is going to read style sheet. Okay, so the rel here is going to read style sheet, and then in the href you provide a path to where your CSS file is living. So by now you guys, you know what we mean by a path. Okay, so if you did not know what I mean by a path, I would have told you the name of the CSS file, of which that is particularly wrong. Okay, but in the href you provide a path to where your CSS file is living. Okay, and I think even in VS Code you can literally right click and then copy the relative path. You can copy the relative path and then paste it here in the href style.css, and you can see when I save it, immediately we have external CSS working perfectly fine. So by the way, guys, if you don't know how to write a path, so let's say for example I have a folder for my CSS here. So I have a folder for CSS, and that is where my CSS file is living. Okay, so if you don't know how to copy up, if you don't know how to write a path to this particular file, and by the way, guys, writing paths is very simple. As you're going to see as time goes by, when you keep coding and coding, this is going to be one of the simplest things you'll ever do. sorry for that. But in this case, if you're a beginner, you've never done anything to do with coding before. For example, Lynn, this is a first time doing whatever we are doing. So if you don't know how to write a path, you can just literally go to this file, right click, and then select copy relative path. Don't copy the path. If you copy path, it's going to give you the absolute path. So this is what an absolute path will look like. Okay, you can see what an absolute path looks like. It has this C, users, Otuoma, documents, T2G, and so on and so forth. But we don't want the absolute path, we want the relative path. So what you will do, you'll right click and then select here, copy relative path, and then in your HTML, that is what you're going to have between the href attribute. And as you can see, we are back to working perfectly fine. So href is equals to CSS / but it's supposed to be /. Don't use a backslash, use a /. But you can just change that manually, of course. And as you can see, it's still working perfectly fine. So in Windows, we use backslash, but in Linux and Mac, they use /. And I also recommend that in Windows, we also use /, because they're also supported in Windows. Anyway, all in all, as you can see, this is working perfectly fine. We have our CSS file here, okay, ending with .css. And we have our CSS code here made up of the selector and the declaration block. And as you can see, we are linking our CSS file here, and that is working perfectly fine. Okay, so that is working 100% perfect. I don't know if anyone has any questions up until this point. So when should we use which selector? So let us look at the best practices. For most of your projects, actually almost all of your projects, please try as much as possible to use external CSS. Okay, so for almost all of your projects, try as much as possible to use external CSS. Of course, we have situations where you really just want to use inline CSS, maybe for performance issues and so on and so forth. That's a bit above us for now. But in almost all of your projects, to keep things clean, try as much as possible to use external CSS. We're going to have a project from tomorrow, and you guys are going to see what I'm talking about. The next best practice, avoid as much as possible to use inline CSS. Avoid as much as possible to use this inline CSS. Okay, again, there are specific situations where you want to use inline CSS. We will discuss those situations when we come to I'm forgetting that name, but when I remember it, I'm going to tell you guys. But avoid as much as possible to use this inline CSS. Avoid as much as possible to use inline CSS, and then use internal CSS sparingly, mainly for prototyping or one-page designs. Again, that is something that as time goes by, we will continue looking at. Now, we also have other ways of adding CSS to HTML, and that is, for example, using a third-party CSS library. For example, we have something like Tailwind CSS. That's a bit beyond us for now. We have something like Bootstrap, we have Balma, and so on and so forth. That's also another way of including CSS. But when we get there, you guys will see what you're talking about. Okay, so that is it about it. So I'm very happy that we now have an idea of what is happening. Okay, so allow me to just get rid of all of this style attribute, because now you want to learn something completely different. Even this heading 1 and stuff, let us just get rid of all of them. Okay, so I want us now to look at CSS selectors. Okay, I want us to look at the basic CSS selectors. By the way, we have lots and lots of CSS selectors. I just want us to look at the very basic CSS selectors. Okay, so I want us to look at the very basic CSS selectors. Now, to style elements on a web page, CSS relies on selectors to target a specific element. Okay, so a CSS selector is a pattern used to identify the HTML element you want to style. That is the definition of a CSS selector. If you're taking notes, you can literally write this down. That a CSS selector is a pattern that is used to identify the HTML element that you want to style. Okay, so think of selectors as a way to tell CSS, apply the following styles to this particular element or this group of elements. Okay, and by the way, by the time we finish this CSS selectors class, all of this is going to make sense. So for now, just know that a CSS selector is basically a pattern that is used to identify the HTML element or the HTML elements that you want to style. And some of the very basic selectors that we have, at least the ones that you'll be using on an almost daily basis, is the class selector, the ID selector, the type or element selector, the grouping selector, and the universal selector. These are most basic CSS selectors. Of course, we have other selectors, for example, pseudo selectors, pseudo selectors, for example. When we get there, we're going to look at them. But for now, these are the most basic CSS selectors, the one that at least you'll be using on an almost daily basis. So let us look at them one by one. And the first one here is the class selector. So the class selector is used to target elements that have a specific class attribute. And notice we are saying elements, not element. So the class selector is used to target elements that have a specific class attribute. So classes are reusable, meaning you can apply the same class to multiple elements. Okay, there's an opposite of this class called an ID, but when we get there, we're going to look at it. For now, just know that classes are reusable, meaning you can apply the same class to multiple elements. Classes are ideal for applying styles to multiple elements that share the same design. So let us have here, for example, a folklore song, a very popular folklore song, okay, an army song. So we can have here, for example, they say that in the army, the pay is mighty fine. Okay, and then another paragraph here, for example, they pay $100 and take back 99. Okay, so yeah, they say that in the army the pay is mighty fine, they give $100 and take back 99. So I'm just trying to do something here, that way it makes sense what you're trying to say. So you can see, for example, here we have a question in our small folklore. We have a question. They say that in the army the pay is mighty fine, and the answer, they pay $100 and take back 99. Maybe one more, a question, for example. They say that in the army the women are mighty fine, and then maybe one more answer here. I'm forgetting the answer for this one. Is it they look like Frankenstein? I can't remember, but let us just leave it at that. Okay, so you can see we have a question and an answer, a question and an answer. So we want to style, for example, all of the questions to, let's say, have a different color, and all of the answers to have a different color. So for this, we can use a CSS class attribute. Okay, so if I say here, for example, class is equal to, I can just, for example, give it a class like, let's say, question. So you can see that is the class attribute that we are using on that particular element. Now, to style this question class, you're going to select it in your CSS and then basically give it whatever styles you want to give it. So this is how you're going to do it. So in your CSS, just a second, in your CSS, whenever you do a dot, you're basically meaning a class. So this is in CSS. This is not now in the terminal. This is now CSS. When you do a dot, it means you are you're basically selecting a class, and then now you follow by the name of that particular class. So in this case, question. Okay, so for example, here now we can give the question a font size of, let's say, 20 pixels or something in those lines. And as you can see now, this particular question is 20 pixels in size. And you can even give it a color, for example, of, let's say, crimson, the same crimson color, and you see it's working perfectly fine. And we said classes are reusable, which means I can use the same class on multiple places. Okay, so I can also have here class is equal to question, like that, and you can see the same style has been applied to that particular element. So you guys, you can now start seeing the real power of having an external style sheet. If you are doing this inline, we would have to write the same styles here. You guys, we would have to write the same style here and write the same style here. Okay, and our classes are basically very nice because you can apply classes to multiple elements. I can even have here another class, and by the way, we have here a very neat emmet trick. So if you want a class in emmet, just start with your element and then dot and then the name of that particular class. So p.question, and when I press enter, you can see we create a paragraph with the class of question. So this paragraph, when I type it, is also going to have the same styles as the other ones because they are sharing the same class, which is being styled like this in our CSS. Okay, so I can say here, for example, they say, okay, maybe another question here. They say that in the army, the coffee is mighty fine. So just a second, guys. And then maybe another paragraph here for the answer. It looks like muddy water and tastes like turpentine. Yeah. So yeah, as you can see now, that is working perfectly fine, right? So a class can be applied to multiple elements and it's going to work just fine. So I can even have a class for answers. So remember, if I want to style a class, I use a dot. Okay, so a dot, and then maybe we can now have here answer. So maybe the answer can have a font size of, let's say, 18 pixels, and then it's going to have, let's say, a color of maybe, I don't know, orange or something in those lines. Okay, and now when I give this element here a class property set to answer, you will now see it's 18 pixels in size and it's orange in color. So this orange is not that readable on white. So let me change it to something like orange red. And I think that's far much better. Okay, so even this one here, I can give it a class of answer like that. And as you can see, it ends up getting those styles. And to the last one here, I can give it a class of, let's say, answer, and it ends up getting that particular style. Okay, so that is basically what we mean by a class. So if you want to select an element using the class selector, you give it a class like this. Okay, and remember, a class can be applied to multiple elements. A class can be applied to multiple elements. So we can see here class is equals to question, and then to select a class in CSS, you use a dot and then the name of the class. And when CSS sees that, it's going to know that that particular thing is a class. Yeah, after the class, we have the ID selector. Okay, so the ID selector targets a single element. Again, look at this. The ID selector targets a single element. You can see it's directly opposite to a class selector. So the ID selector targets a single element with a specific ID attribute. So IDs are unique, meaning each element can only have each element can have only one ID. I think this statement is a bit wrong. I think an element can have multiple IDs, but the thing is that no two elements can share the same ID. Okay, so one ID belongs to one element. I want you guys to take an example of your ID number. So my ID number, okay, is personal to me. It doesn't belong to anyone else. That belongs to me and me alone. Okay, Irene's ID number belongs to her and her alone. So that is the same thing in CSS. The moment you give an element an ID, then you cannot use that ID on any other element. Even if it works, it's a bad practice and you are basically going against the rules. So an ID should belong to only one element. So here, for example, we can have a heading 2 with the ID. So remember I showed you guys yesterday how to do an ID in Emmet. We can have a heading 2 with the ID of title, and then you can just say here the army song. Okay, so we can now target our ID here. Again, guys, you don't have to understand the styles that I'm writing. We're going to discuss them. So if you don't know what font size is, if you don't know what color is, so you just look at the things happening. Just for now, the thing you need to understand is the selector. So we'll come back to all of these properties and values later on. So when you want to target an ID in CSS, you use a pound symbol. You use a hash symbol like that. So remember, for a class, you use a dot. For an ID, you use a pound. So because our ID is called title, I'm going to have here title, and then I can now have here my styles. So for example, I can align the text here to the center. Okay, maybe give it a background color of, I don't know, black, like that, and give itself a color of, let's say, white. And as you can see, it works perfectly fine. So that is the ID selector. Again, don't bother learning these styles themselves for now. We will come back to them in details later on. For now, what you need to understand is that this is how you select an ID in CSS. You use a pound symbol and then the ID itself. Okay, so you use a pound symbol and then the ID itself. I really hope you guys are understanding what is happening there. Come again? Yeah, the pound symbol here, it is hash title. Okay, is this a pound symbol or a real symbol or a hash? Can I say hash? Not pound. Oh, okay. So a hash symbol then. So you use a hash symbol and then that particular ID. So hash and then title. So you can see here, for example, the ID was title. So you use a hash and then that particular ID. So hash title. So remember, for a class it's dot. For your ID, it's going to be a hash, like that. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. Okay, next we have type or element selector. This one we've already used. Type selector, also called the element selector, targets all elements of a specific HTML tag. Okay, so the type or element selector, you basically select the HTML element type. You select that particular HTML element directly. Let me just show this to you guys. I don't know why my VS Code is really misbehaving like that. So we have here H2 title is equal to song. So we have here, for example, H3. Okay, maybe let's say composed by unknown, maybe something like that. Okay, so if I want to style this heading 3, okay, using the element selector, you basically select that particular element using that, that HTML element. So H3 like that. I can, for example, say here text align center like that, and as you can see, it's working perfectly fine. And even maybe underline it. So text decoration, something like underline. Again, no need to understand those. Just see it working for now. So that is the element selector. And basically now in our page, or rather whichever page the CSS is being used, by the way, guys, I forgot to tell you, but your HTML page can have multiple CSS files. Okay, you can link to as many CSS files as you want. Just know there might be some performance issues when you do that. Okay, we will discuss that later on, but for now, just know that if you want, you can have multiple CSS files in your HTML document. So wherever we use this CSS file, any heading 3 element is going to have this style. It's going to be center aligned and it's going to be underlined. So here, for example, I can try to have here another heading 3 at the very end, after where we are saying it looks like muddy water and tastes like turpentine. I can try to have another heading 3. So somewhere here to the bottom. I don't know what this is. How do I remove this thing here? Add element to the chart. Okay, yeah, something like that. So I can have here another heading 3. Maybe it's something like thank you for reading, something like that. So if I save that and go to the bottom, you can see that this heading 3 comes in that particular style. So basically here, what you're telling CSS is that all the heading 3 elements in this page are supposed to have this style here. Okay, so you're telling CSS that all the heading 3 elements are supposed to have these styles: text align set to center and text decoration set to underline. So any heading 3 element that you throw into the page is going to have that particular style. So that is the element selector. Nothing crazy about it. Okay, next we have the grouping selector. The grouping selector is used to apply the same styles to multiple elements by separating their selectors with a comma. So it's like grouping items. You guys, in Windows, for example, you can group items. Oh, sorry, not in Windows, but in something like Microsoft Word. Okay, you can group items and then give them a similar formatting. So that is what this grouping selector does. It's used to group, it's used to apply the same styles to multiple elements by separating their selectors with a comma. Okay, and this is very simple. So here, for example, I can target the heading 1 and group it with the heading 3 and group it with the paragraph. And let's say, for example, okay, sorry for that. And then give them a style like this here. What style can I give it that will be quite unique? Maybe a border of 5 pixels, solid green, like that. So you can see this is a grouping selector. I'm grouping H1, H3, paragraph, and if I want, I can even group some classes. Okay, I can even group here the class of question. I can also group here the class of answer. So this is what we refer to as the grouping selector. You're basically grouping items that you want to style together. So here we are grouping the heading 1 with the heading 3, question and answer, and then you're giving it a border of 5 pixels solid green. You don't have to understand what that border is for now. Just know that that is how it works. Okay. So this, you can see, for example, this title here, the army song, it does not receive that particular. You can see it's a heading 2, and we are not grouping it here. So if I want, I can also group it here. So heading 1, heading 2, the heading 3, the class of question and the class of answer. And as you can see, that is working as expected. Okay. So that is how the grouping selector works. And then last but not least, we have the universal selector. So the universal selector targets all the elements in a web page. Okay, a very interesting selector here. It targets all the elements in a web page, and it is represented by an asterisk. And by the way, guys, in programming, or rather generally in computing, 99% of the times, whenever you see this asterisk symbol, it usually means everything. Most of the times, that is. Okay, most of the times when you see this asterisk symbol, it usually means everything. So for those of you who did computer science and you did something to do with regular expressions in the automata theory unit, you remember this asterisk symbol, which we use to mean everything, basically. So here, even here in this case, let me just get rid of, okay, I don't want to get rid of all the stylings, but I can, for example, here, I can target everything. I can target everything in the page and give it a different font family. Okay, you don't have to know what a font family is, but I can say here, for example, font family, something like this impact, whatever that is. And as you can see, we end up having a different font family for everything. So I have targeted everything. By the way, please don't bother trying to understand this. We'll come back to whatever is happening. But as you can see here, we are targeting everything using this universal selector. Okay, and as you can see, we've targeted everything and given everything this style that you're seeing here, the army song composed by unknown. Okay, maybe I should just change the font once again so that you guys believe what I'm trying to tell you here. I can change the font family to something more beautiful. Let's say maybe fantasy or something. Okay, doesn't do anything, but I think you guys you get the idea of what is happening. So boys and girls, those are selectors, the basic selectors, at least the selectors that you'll be using on an almost daily basis. So does anyone have any question around the topic of selectors? Any question before we move to the next topic and then take a break? Okay, maybe you can just have here a heading 1. CSS is fun. Okay, any question around selectors? Okay, let us look at colors before we take a short break. Any question? Okay. So I don't need to define what a color is. I think you guys know what we mean by a color, so I don't need to go through the definition of a color. So CSS provides various ways to define colors for styling elements. Okay. CSS, it provides various ways to define colors for styling elements, and these colors include, these ways to define colors for elements include, number one, we have predefined color names. Okay, so the color names that you know, red, green, aqua, Alice blue, purple, magenta. So those predefined color names, you can use them to to give the elements a color. Next, we have the RGB function, a very interesting one, as you guys are going to see in a short while. We have the hex. We're also going to see that. The HSL function, I'm not well conversant with this one. You guys might have to go do your own research for this HSL. And then we have the RGBA function, and then the HSLA function. So let us look at them one by one. The first one here is predefined color names. So CSS comes with a set of predefined color names that can be used directly in your styles. And these color names are the same as those that we use in our day-to-day life. For example, red, green, blue, orange, black, etc. And by the way, now, this is a perfect time to mention it. The color property in CSS is used to give your text a color. Specifically text, not anything else. So the color property is used to give your text a color. So here, for example, I can come and have here my heading 1. So we are looking at the predefined color names. So I can give it a color. Let us just give it a big font size first of all, of let's say 80 pixels. 80 pixels. That way, we are able to see exactly what is happening. So the color property to give your text a color, your text specifically, nothing else, not your layout, not your anything else. Your text is given a color by this color property. And when I type color and press enter, you can see this list here of predefined color names that we can use. Okay, coral, flower blue, all of these colors here. Okay, and in case on your end it's not loading, or maybe for some reason that is not happening, just press Control and spacebar on your keyboard, and the VS Code is going to open suggestions of what you can use there. Okay, so for example here, I can go with this fuchsia, that color there, and when I save, you can see my text ends up having that particular color. So that's a predefined color name. I can also change the color to say green here, for example, and as you can see, it ends up being green. I can have here, for example, orange, and as you can see, that's also a predefined color name. We end up having an orange color. I can also have here orange red, and you can see we end up having an orange red color. So these are the predefined color names that you can use in CSS. Okay, so those are the predefined color names that you can use in CSS. It's lots of them. You can't even, you'll probably retire from your front-end web development journey without using all of those colors. Okay, it's hundreds, if not thousands of them, of those colors. Okay, now before we look at the RGB function, I want us to look at the opacity property in CSS. Okay. I want us to look at the opacity property in CSS. So the opacity property determines the transparency of an element. The opacity property in CSS, we have a property called opacity, and this property called opacity, it is used to determine the transparency of an element. And it takes any numeric value between 0 and 1, 0 and 1 inclusive, where 1 means fully opaque and 0 means completely transparent. So basically what you're trying to say here is that you can play the transparency of the color of this element using the opacity property. By the way, guys, as you can see, my color is being highlighted. I'm using an extension in VS Code. That extension is called Color Highlight. By the way, let me just very quickly take 1 or 2 seconds to discuss my VS Code configuration. So I'm using this color highlight extension to basically highlight my colors. Okay, so I also recommend that you also install this extension for your colors to be highlighted. And then I know you guys, you're using that boring VS Code theme. For me, you can see my theme is a bit different. The colors are very vibrant. The color of VS Code itself is a bit vibrant. For that, I'm using an extension called Cobalt 2 theme. So you can install this extension. I highly recommend, by the way, guys, you work with this extension, Cobalt 2 theme. I've written it, I've opened it here in the presentation. This one here, Cobalt 2 theme. Let me just paste it in the chat box so that you guys can search for it. I don't want you guys to be using those boring VS Code themes. So the theme that I'm talking about here is this theme here called Cobalt 2 theme. A very excellent theme. So when you install it, VS Code will ask you to change your color theme, and then you can go with it. Okay. And then next, as you can see here, my CSS, my folders, as you can see, they're getting these icons here. I'm sure for you guys, when you create index.html file, you don't have this icon for HTML. So for me, even if I decide to create a Python file, for example, let's say app.py, you can see I have this Python icon to the side of it. If I decide to create a C# file, for example, let's say, just a second, let's say index.cs for C#, you see this nice C# icon. If I decide for C, you can see I get that one for C. If I go for C++, you can see that that is working perfectly fine. For Rust, you can see I get that nice Rust icon. For Ruby, and so on and so forth. So the extension I'm using for that, I don't know if I can remember the name. Is it called Material Icon? Material Icon theme, if I'm not wrong. I can't remember the name, guys. Yeah, I think it's this one here, Material Icon theme. So when you install it, you get some nice icons on your VS Code instead of the boring default icons. You can see it has over 30 million downloads. Okay, so let me copy this name and also paste it. And then we now go back to our discussion. I didn't want to look like a foreigner here. I wanted us to be on the same page. So you can also look at that material icon theme at your own time. So back to our discussion here in CSS, we were talking about the opacity property in CSS. So this opacity property, it's used to determine the transparency of an element. Okay, and it takes any value between 0 and 1. Any value between 0 and 1. So for example, here I can type opacity. The default value is 1, meaning fully opaque. Okay, 1 means fully opaque. But if you type 0, then the element becomes completely transparent. Our text still here. Okay, you can even see the cursor knows that there is a text here. But as of now, it is completely transparent because of this value here, 0. If I want it to be half transparent, I can use 0.5. And as you can see now, it is kind of half transparent. I can see through it, kinda. Okay, if I decide to go with something like 0.2, you can see it's even more transparent, 0.1, and so on and so forth. If I go with 0.7, and you know, I can keep going like that, 0.4, just any value between 0 and 1. Any value between 0 and 1 is going to work perfectly fine. So this here is a value between 0 and 1. Okay, so remember, 0 means completely transparent, like that, and then 1 means fully opaque. So that is the property, that is the opacity property, which is used to define the transparency of an element. So we use the opacity property to determine the transparency of an element. So that is something that you guys, I highly recommend you look into. Okay, so the opacity property determines the transparency of an element, and as we've seen, it takes any numeric value between 0 and 1, and where 0 and 1 is inclusive. So you said 1 is fully opaque and 0 is completely transparent. Now let us look at working with colors using the RGB function. So the RGB function in CSS, okay, so RGB stands for red, green, and blue, specifies colors by combining the intensities of red, green, and blue. So for those of us who did creative arts in primary school in class 1 and class 2, okay, if you did creative arts around then you know about this concept of combining colors to create different colors. Okay, so basically some people sat down that when you combine different intensity of red, green, and blue, you can create an infinite, amount of colors. You can create lots and lots and lots of colors when you combine RGB, when you combine red, green, and blue. Okay, so each of these color channels, red, green, and blue, have a value between 0 and 255. So you basically pass 0 between 0 and 255, and that will basically give you whatever color you want. Okay, so when you combine the intensities of red, green, and blue, you create as many colors as you want. And this is the perfect time to tell you guys that white is not a color and black is not a color. So people just say color white to make things simple and color black to make things simple. But if you find somebody in arts, they will tell you that white is not a color and even black is not a true color. So white and black are true colors. Basically, white means all the colors together, and then black means the absence of all colors. So for example, in this room, if you were to remove all the colors, if you found a way to get rid of all the colors in this room, then you would end up creating black. Okay, so black means the absence of all the colors, and then white means all the colors together. So if you found these colors, red, green, and blue, in their full intensities, 255, 255, and 255, you end up creating color white. So if you guys don't believe me, let us do it practically here. So I can set here, for example, the color.
We use the RGB function. Okay, and the logo is saying you're supposed to pass three values. So
X, Y, and Z. You're supposed to pass three values. So the first value should be between 0 and 255, and that will represent the intensity of red. The second value, the same thing, between 0 and 255, and that will represent the intensity of green. And then the third value, any value between 0 and 255, and that will represent the intensity of blue. So remember, we've said white means all the colors together. So if I put here all the colors together, so 255 for red, 255 for green, and 255 for blue, we end up creating white, as you can see, by this color highlight extension. Okay, so white is not a true color. Now, if I remove all of these colors, if I was to get rid of all of these colors, if I was to get rid of red by putting here a 0, okay, and get rid of green by putting here a 0, and get rid of blue by putting here a 0, we end up creating black. So remember, guys, white and black, they are not true colors, and they belong to something known as the grayscale family. Okay, so if you go look at something known as the grayscale, something in those lines, you'll go see that it is basically that black and white family. Okay, so white, all the colors together, and then black, no color. So even in this room, if you found a way, I don't know how you're going to do it, but if you found a way to remove all the colors in this room, you will end up creating black. If you find a way of putting all the intensities, I don't know again how you do it in this room, to put all the intensities of all the colors in full in this particular room, then you will end up creating white. Now, if you combine the different intensities of these values, you can end up creating whatever color you want. Just remember, the value is supposed to be between 0 and 255. So for example, here, I can replace this 0 with, let's say, something like 99, and I end up creating this greenish color here. Okay, so you can see when I remove all the red and put 99 in green and remove all the blue, you see I end up with this greenish color. So let us combine here, let's say something like 240 in, so you can see when I use 240 in red and 99 in green and nothing in blue, I end up having this orangish. Is this orange? This is orange. Yeah, I end up creating this orange color here. Even here for the blue, I can try to have something like, let's say, 67 in blue, and you can see it's still that orangish color. Maybe 100 in blue, and you can see it's starting to change. Maybe 101. Let's try 200 in blue here, and now you can see we have this color that looks like fuchsia. I think we had a color like that one. We had fuchsia. Yeah, fuchsia. Okay, they're not the same, but it's am I the same? Yeah, they're not the same. So we have that color fuchsia there. Okay, but basically, if you just combine the different values between 0 and 255, you can create an infinite amount of colors here. Okay, there are lots of combinations of colors here, lots of them, by the way, probably millions. Okay, so if we try maybe 1 red and 99 in green and 200 in blue, you can see we have this color here. Let us try 20 in blue, maybe 9 in that one, and you can see here now heading towards black, and it's basically a very nice blackish color here. So maybe 19, if we try 109 here, we have that greenish color. If we try maybe 230 or 240 here, yeah, you can see that basically continues going on like that. So you just combine the different intensities of red, green, and blue, and you will end up having different colors. Okay, what if we try to put the same intensities here? So maybe 240 by 240 by 240. you can see we have this almost grayish color here. Okay, and that's interesting, by the way. If we try 24 by 24 by 24, you can see we go to something to do with the grayscale. What if we try, let's say, I don't know, 190 by 190 by 190? Yeah, you can see we have this grayish color. So the key takeaway here is that we combine different intensities of red, green, and blue. Okay, we combine the different intensities of red, green, and blue, and then we end up having whatever color we want. So you can create here a lot of colors. At your own time, you can literally try to write a JavaScript code that combines these different colors in all possible permutations, and you will see you'll end up having a lot of colors, like lots of colors. I love them basically. Okay, so that is it about it. After the RGB function, we have the what else? The hexadecimals. So hexadecimal color codes represent colors in 6 digits using combinations of 0 to 9 and A to F. So we use 6 digits, okay, or rather we use 6 characters, of which they're supposed to be 0 to 9, A to F. And of course, you've guessed, or you've already guessed it correctly. If it's 6 digits, the 2 digits, 2, 2, 2, to make 6, they represent red, green, and blue. Okay, and remember, it's any value between 0 to 9 and A to F. And remember, the full intensity of those colors together will give you white. If you remove all of those colors, they will give you black. So again, if you want to use the hexadecimal colors, you are supposed to start with the hash symbol, like that, a hash symbol, and then you provide here the following values. Sorry, not the following values, but you provide here 6 digits. Okay, when I say digits, I'm not meaning numbers. Let us just say alphanumeric digits, of which the only valued items are between 0 and 9 and A to F. Okay, so the first 2, they will represent red. The second 2, they will represent green. The third 2, they will represent blue. And again, remember, if I remove all the red, I remove all the green, and I remove all the blue, I end up creating black. Because remember, black is when we remove all the colors. If I put all the red, remember it's the maximum. Okay, so remember it's supposed to be 0 to 9 and then A to F. If I put all the red, I put all the green, and I put all the blue, I end up creating white. Okay, so here, just come up with any combination. The only thing you need to make sure is that it's between 0 to 9 and A to F. So I can decide to use here, for example, 9, B, let's say in the next one here, maybe A2, 9B, A2, and then maybe 8A or something. And you can see I end up creating a color. Maybe I've never even seen this color before. I think it's supposed to be jungle green, if I'm not wrong. But as you can see, that is basically how we do it. Okay, so let me pick one person. Let us have Lynn. So Lynn, give me any characters between 0 to 9 and A to F. So the first one, give me any characters between 0 to 9 and A to F. So the first one, okay, anyone who's ready, anything between 0 to 9 and A to F. 6, yes. Come on, guys. Anything? Yes. Okay, B, yes. 7, C. I'm waiting, guys. 8, 8. 8, 8, yeah. And you see, we end up creating a color. So you can see we're just coming up with these numbers. As long as it's any number between 0 to 9 and A to F, okay? If you combine those colors to make 6 characters like this, not colors, if you combine those characters to make 6 like this, then you end up creating a color. So 8, 8. This one will stand for blue. So remember, the first 2 characters are for red, the second 2 characters for green, and then the last 2 characters for blue. Yes? Yeah, in terms of the alphabet, come 8, 8.
Okay,
We've said that you're supposed to have we've said that hexadecimal color codes represent colors in 6 digits using a combination, or rather using combinations of 0 to 9 and A to F. So if you pick any character between 0 to 9 and A to F, and you keep, concatenating those characters until you have a string of length 6, like this one here, then you end up creating a color. I don't know what 8 would mean in a real color wheel or something, but all I know is that if you just combine these characters like this, as long as it's a value, okay, as long as it's a value between 0 to 9 and A to F, then you end up creating a color. Okay, so maybe we can just try to do it one more time. That way we are now moving together with everyone. Guys, give me any other character. It's as long as it's between 0 to 9 and A to F. Let's start with the first one. Guys, any character between 0 to 9 and A to F. Okay, 7 and then 1. Yes, another one. I've had 3 and then ABC, right? Oh, sorry, ABC, it's now that is beyond 6 characters. So you can see we end up creating this purplish color. So 71 stands for red, 13 stands for green, and then AB stands for blue. So as you can see here, we have 6 characters. Let me just separate them. That way you guys see what you're talking about. So the first 2, they stand for red. The second 2, they stand for green. And then the third 2 stand for blue. As long as it's any value between 0 to 9 and A to F, you will end up creating a color. It's that simple. There is nothing complicated about it. Do you have any other question around that? So remember, guys, as long as it's any symbol between 0 to 9 and A to F, it will work perfectly fine. You end up having a color. I promise you that. Okay, so you will end up having a color at the end of the day. Okay, so back to our RGB. Okay, so if we go back to RGB here, if you want to have red, then you use full red. Remember, for RGB, it's between 0 to 55. So you go full red, and then you remove the green and you remove the blue, and with that you'll have red. Okay, if you want to have green, then you will remove the red and the blue. Okay, and then you'll have here 255 for green, and as you can see, we end up green. If you want to have blue, then remove the red and remove the green, and then have your full blue here, 255. So same thing with this, same thing with our hexadecimals. So if you want to have red, make sure you have full red, and then remove the green, remove the blue, and you have your red there. So hash FF0000 is red. If you want to have green, then you remove the red, 00, you have your full green, and then you remove the blue. And as you can see there, we end up having green. So green is hash 00FF00. If you want to have blue, you remove the red, you remove the green, and then you have your full blue, like that. So blue is hash 0000FF. I really hope you're together as far as that is concerned. Of course, if you have any question or would like me to repeat, I'd be happy to do so. So that is basically it about it. Now, when it comes to this hexadecimal, you can also use a combination of 3 characters, and it will still work. So for now, you can see we are using 6 characters, okay? But you can also use a combination of 3 characters. And of course, you've already guessed, those 3 characters, they must be between A 0 to 9 and A to F, okay? And the first character will represent red, the second character green, the third character blue. So if I want here to create color red, I will go with full red, remove green, and remove blue, and congratulations, I have color red. So even hash FOO, it's color red. If I want green, if I want green, I will remove red, put the full green with F, and then remove blue. And look at that, guys, we have our green. If I want blue, I will remove the red, remove the green, and have my blue there. And basically, as long as I'm having anything between 0 to 9 and A to F, I will keep creating colors as much as I want. Okay? So as long as it's anything between 0 to 9 and A to F, I'll just keep creating colors here. So I'm really hoping we are together as far as this is concerned.
Okay.
Okay, so that is another variation of hexadecimal. So when you see people use text characters in the hexadecimal, just know that is what they're trying to mean. So this HSL function, I don't want to lie to you guys. I'm not yet that familiar with it. I always forget to go through it. But at your own time, you can go do your own research, because either way, I personally don't use it too much. As long as you have one way of getting a color, then as long as you have this RGB, you're more than good to go. And even this hexadecimal and the predefined color palettes, then more than good to go. Now, let's look at the RGBA function. So the RGBA function is an extension of RGB with an added alpha parameter for transparency. So remember, we've talked about the opacity. So this RGBA is a variation of the RGB, but now it has some opacity to it. Okay, so RGBA, it's an extension of RGB, but now it has some opacity to it. So the alpha parameter takes a value between 0 and 1. So we saw that in the opacity, and this will determine how transparent or how opaque that particular element will be. Okay, with 0 meaning completely transparent and 1 meaning completely opaque. So this is what I'm trying to talk about here. With our RGBA, let us in fact use black. Black is going to be far much easier. So we are going to have the same values. Let us just have black by removing all the colors. But now you can see this 0 stands for R, this other 0 stands for G, and then this other 0 stands for B. So what about A? So that is where the alpha parameter comes into play. So this A is the alpha parameter, and it's used to determine the transparency of that particular element. Of course, you're supposed to pass any value between 0 and 1. 0 means completely transparent, and 1 means completely opaque. So if I pass here 0, you see our element becomes completely transparent. If I pass 0.6, you can see it's, working on still becoming transparent, and so on and so forth. Of course, we're going to see this in greater details when we start learning about backgrounds. But as you can see, that is what we mean by RGBA. We just have this alpha parameter over here for transparency, the RGBA function. Okay, so even if I was to put here color white, 255 by 255 by 255, and then I pass here 0.3 for transparency, or 0.8. Of course, this is color white. I don't know how you're trying. I don't even know why you're trying to make it transparent. But maybe if I were to put here maybe 0, you can see we have this transparentish yellow. And it's a very ugly yellow, by the way. Actually, let's just, get rid of it by trying to look for a value. Yeah, that's far much better. So maybe 0.1, you can see it's very transparent. I don't know if you guys can see here. This CSS is fun, but it's very transparent. Okay. So, oh, I thought somebody was trying to log in. But either way, I hope you guys now know the difference between RGB and RGBA. So even HSLA, okay, the HSLA is also a variation of the HSL. And again, at your own time, please go look at the HSL function. Now let us look at the transparent keyword. So the transparent keyword sets the element color to be fully transparent. That's all it does. So there's nothing here to learn too much. So even if I was to set, by the way, for the color value, you can literally put here transparent like that. And now the element will be completely transparent. It has not been removed from the page, but now it is completely transparent. So this is also like a color in CSS, transparent. Basically, the element becomes completely transparent. Any questions up to that point? Okay, there are no questions. Let us take a 10 minutes break and be back here by 11:10. stretch or something. By the way, I sent a link to submit the assignments. You want to me a box? Submit assignment. Assignment size. Tumeanza size assignment. Toa kila kitu. Sasa vile exclamation. Sasa Oh. I was still sharing my screen. Okay, ni sawa tu either way. Okay, I want us to look at CSS backgrounds. So the CSS background properties. So we have various background properties in CSS, and they allow you to control the appearance of an element's background. Okay, but then we've already seen one property called the color property, which allows us to give our text a color. So we have these background properties in CSS that they allow you to control the appearance of an element's backgrounds. So these properties add or control the background effects for an element. And some of these properties are background color, background image, the background repeat property, background attachment, background position, and just background like that, the background shorthand. Okay, it's a bit complicated, this background shorthand, but we'll still be able, okay, sorry, not complicated, not this one. I'm forgetting it, I'm confusing it with something else. But we just have these background properties in CSS. So let us look at them one by one. And the first one that I want us to look at is the background color. So as the name suggests, the background color property adds a solid color behind an element. So by now you know how to do colors in CSS. Very simple and very straightforward. So it can take color values like named colors, for example, hex, RGB, HSL, and others. And whatever color you want to pass, you can set the background color of an element using this background color property. So for that, I want to have a div inside of my HTML, okay? Just for testing purposes, I'm going to have a div. And this div, I'm going to give it a width and a height. Of course, I know you don't know the width and the height properties in CSS yet, but we just touched on it in HTML. I'm going to give it a width of, let's say, 200 pixels and a height of 200 pixels. Okay, so this is the width and the height property in CSS. As you can see, nothing complicated about it. But for now, what I want us to look at is the background color property. So of course, we have that particular element here, but of course, we can't see it because, yeah, it doesn't contain any content inside of it. But now this element, I can give it a background color, okay, of anything that you want. You can use these predefined colors. You can use RGB, or you can use the hex, of which by now you know how to do all of that. So I can give it, for example, aquamarine. And as you can see, we end up giving this particular element a background color of aquamarine. If I want, I can give it a red color, for example, like that. And as you can see, our element ends up having a red color. Okay, even if we decide to go with the hex color over here, let's say we want to give it black. So we remove all the colors. And as you can see, we end up having that working perfectly fine. Okay, so the background color property is used to give an element a background color. So for example, we can target our entire website, and to target our entire website here, we are going to use the body property. Okay, so we can target our entire web page using the body property. And when we use this body property, it targets the entire page, and we can give it a background color of, let's say, something like purple. And if we save that, you can see we end up having a purple color. And even if we go back to our page here and refresh it, you see we end up having a purple background color. Of course, it's a bit ugly, but maybe I know we have experts in here who can combine colors in a way that will make it end up looking a bit nicer. Okay, just a second. Yeah, so that is the background color property, which is used to set the background color of an element. I'm sorry this keeps loading. Of course, the internet is a bit weak, but let us see how the school is going to help us in that zone. So the background color adds a solid color behind an element. So we now know how the background color works. And we've seen it takes color values like named colors, hex, RGB, HSL, and others. So if you want to give an element a background color, you use that background color property. Next, we have the we have the background image property next. So as the name suggests, this property sets an image as the background of an element. Okay, and for the value, it takes a URL function as the value where you pass the path. When I say the path, you guys know what you mean by the path. So it takes this URL function as the value where you pass the path to the image you want to use as a background. So I don't know if I have an image here. Let me see if in downloads I have any image. I want a bigger image than these ones here. Let me see, guys. These ones are a bit too small. I don't want to use those. Okay, just a second, guys. Let me see if I can get an image. Yeah, I remember. Yeah, I know where you can get an image here in Mailzone Collab images. Yeah. So let us get one image here. For example, this one here, this image of a restaurant, or even maybe this one here. Okay, that one is a bit small. Maybe this one. I'm trying to look at the sizes. 543 kilobytes. Is that really big? Yeah, I think this one is big enough. So let me go that. And in our CSS learning, I create a new folder called images. So images. And then inside that images folder, I throw in there my image. So I can just rename this image to IMG. So the image is called IMG. Now we are talking about the background image property. So here you can see we've already seen the background color property. We're not talking about the background image property, which is used to place an image as the background of an element. Okay, so I can give this body, for example, a background image. And by the way, you can see how I'm typing. In Visual Studio Code, you don't have to type everything. For example, instead of typing here background image, all of it, just type a few characters and then VS Code will know what you want. So I can just type here back IMG, and as you can see, I narrow down to whatever I want and then press enter, and I end up having it perfectly fine. So background image, and it takes in the URL, it takes in this URL function as a value, and then to this function you pass in the path, not the absolute, relative path to where your image is. So here I can just do that I've shown you guys. Go to the image and then right click and then select copy relative path. So when I copy the relative path and I go here to the CSS, I can put the relative path to that particular image here, like that. So save this, and if we refresh our page here, okay, let me see why we're not seeing it. Maybe we should give our body some sort of a height or something. Height 100, sorry, 1000 pixels. Okay, it's not giving me what I want, but I know where the problem is. Let me start here with a dot / and it's still not working. That is strange. Oh yeah, I know. You're supposed to put this between double quotes. Okay, I believe that is the issue. You're supposed to put this between the double quotes. If it works, I'm going to show you, to show that to you perfectly. It's still not working. I don't get why. Wait, how does this property work? We're trying to set URL and it's not picking it up. Images /. Do you guys see where the issue might be? Images /img.png. Yeah, I have the images directory and then img.jpg, but it is not picking it. Why is that the case? Let me see. Just a second, guys. Let me try to fix this issue here. Let me see if background color is going to work. Red. Why is background image not working? Background image, URL, and then ./images/img.jpg. Anyone has an idea why this is not picking? Again? On your side it's working. But why is it not working on your side here? Because I have this IMG in the images folder. Wait. CSS learning. It's not picking on my end at all. But guys, this is how you put an image. Okay. This is supposed to be the syntax. I don't know what's wrong with my machine here. Okay, let us try. /. Okay.
images
Images
slash
slash img.jpg.
oh yeah,
Oh yeah,
I
I
get
know,
it.
guys, what is happening
Yes.
in this case.
Yeah, I understand what is
Yeah, I
happening.
understand what is happening.
Okay, I'll give
Okay, I'll just put here
okay.
the URL. So this one is going to work. I'm 100% sure.
But
But
click
I will explain this later on,
what is happening.
what basically has
So this is
happened.
how you
But
put
this is how you
image
put an
as the
image
background.
as the
So the
background.
thing is that
So the thing is
the
that
relative path,
the relative path,
okay,
okay,
the relative path that
the
you have
relative path that you
copied
have copied,
goes inside
because
our
you can
CSS
see our
file.
CSS file is inside of this
CSS directory.
CSS directory.
So when you provide
So
the
when you
path,
provide
you
the
need to
path,
first of
we
all
need to
get
first
out
of
of
all
the
get out
CSS
of
file.
this CSS
That is
file,
what
and
dot
that
dot
is
dot
what
slash
dot
means.
slash usually means.
So
So dot slash,
in this case, as you
in
can
this
see,
case,
dot
as you
dot
can see,
slash
dot
usually
slash,
means
it
to
usually
get
means
out
to
of the
get out
current
of the
folder,
current folder,
of which in this case is the
the
CSS
CSS
folder. And
folder,
then we go
and then
into
now
the
we go
images
into the images directory, or
directory,
rather the images folder,
and then inside there
and
we
then
have
inside
our
there we have our
img.jpg.
img.jpg.
But
But basically,
this is how we
this
put
is
an
how we put
image
an
in
image
CSS. So
in
don't
CSS. By the way, guys, don't worry about these parts over here.
as time goes by, you are
As
going to
time
see
goes
how
by, you're
simple
going
they
to
are.
see how simple they
So for
are.
now, just
So
know
for now, just
dot
know
means the current
dot means the
directory,
current
and then
directory,
dot
and
dot
then dot dot
usually means get
usually
out
means
of the
get
current
out of the
directory. So
current
as I said,
directory. And when I say directory, I'm meaning folder.
so again,
So
dot will
again,
mean the current
dot will
folder,
mean the current
and then
folder, and
means
then
get out of the
means
current
get out
folder.
of the current
So you can
folder.
see here
So you
in
can
my
see here in my
in
CSS
my
file, in my
style.css, I'm
style.css,
basically
I'm
saying
basically
get
saying
out of the
get
current
out of the
folder.
current
That is
folder.
what dot
That
dot
is what
means.
dot means.
So get out
So
of the
get
current
out of the
folder. So
current
it will
folder.
get
So
out of
it
the
will get out
current
of the current
CSS folder.
CSS folder.
Okay, and now it
Okay,
will be
and
able to
now
see
it will be able to
CSS
see
images and
CSS images and
then
index.html,
you're telling
and
it to
then you're
go to
telling it to go
images.
to
So it
images.
goes into
So it goes
images
into
and then
images, and then
img.jpg,
img.jpg,
and
and then
there we have
there we
our
have our
img.
img.jpg.
So that is how you
So
put
that
a
is how you put
background
a
image
background
in
image
CSS.
in
So you can
CSS.
see I'm
You
using
can
a
see I'm
background
using
image
background
and then
image and
URL,
then URL,
and
and
into
into
that
that
we
you're
are passing
passing
the
the
URL
URL
to
to
where our
where
image
our
is.
image is.
Okay,
Okay,
so that is
so that
very
is
very much
very,
perfect.
very
So that is the
much perfect. So
background
that is the background
image property.
image
It
property.
sets an
It
image
sets
as
an
the
image
background
as the
element,
background of an
and
element.
as we've
And
seen,
as we've
it takes
seen,
this
it
URL
takes
function
this
as a
URL
value,
function as a
where you
value,
pass the
where you
path to
pass
the
the path
image
to the
that you want
image
to
that
use
you
as a
want to use
background.
as a background.
So you can see in this
So you
case,
can see in this case, that is what you're
the
doing,
URL,
URL,
and
and
path
then the
to the
path
image
to
that you
the
want to
image
use
that
as
you
a
want to use
background.
as a background.
Next, we have this
Next, we
background
have
repeat
this background
property.
repeat property.
Okay, so
Okay,
when you
so
use
when
an
we
image
use
as a
an image
background,
as a
by
background,
default the
by
image is
default,
repeated
image is
so that it
repeated
covers
so
the
that it
entire
covers the
element.
entire
Of course, you
element.
can't
Of
see it
course, you
here,
can't see it here,
but if I was to
but
use
if I were to
a
use
smaller
here a
image,
smaller
let me go
image,
back
let me go
to
back to what we
our directory,
to our
or
directory
rather to
here,
this
or
Milton
rather to
collab.
this Milton collab, and try to look for a smaller image.
So images,
So
I
images,
want here a
I
very
want here
small
a very
image.
small image.
Okay, maybe this one.
Okay, maybe this one.
I hope it's small
I
enough
hope it's
to be able
small
to show you
enough
guys what
to
I
be
mean.
able to show you guys what I'm talking about.
So back
So
to CSS
back to
learning,
CSS
and then
learning
images,
and then images,
and then I place this
and then I
image
place
here.
this image here.
So I can just
So I
call
can
this
just call this
img. So
img2.
when an image
So
is
when an
small,
image is small, by default,
let us just use
let us just use here
img2.jpg. When an
img2.jpg.
image is
So when an
small,
image is small,
by default
the
the browser
browser
will
will
repeat
repeat
that
that
particular
particular
image
image
for
for
it
it
to
to
cover
cover
the entire
the
browser.
entire browser.
So you can see in this
So you
case,
can see
this
in this
image
case,
has been
this image has
repeated.
been
I don't know if
repeated.
you guys
I
can
don't know
see
if you
that,
guys can see that,
but you can see this
but you can
image
see this
ends
image
here,
ends
and
here,
then it is
and then
repeated
it is
from
repeated
here
from
all the way
here
to the
all
end.
the way to the
And then
end.
as you can
And then
see,
as you can
it
see,
continues to
it
be repeated
continues to
at
be
the bottom.
repeated at the bottom.
So
So when
when
an
an
image
image
is
is
too
too small,
small,
by default
by
the browser
default,
is
the
going to
browser is
repeat
going to
that
repeat that
particular image
particular
so that
image
it fits
so
the
that it fits
entire
the
element.
entire
Not the
element.
browser
Not
screen,
the
but
browser
just
screen,
using
by
the
the way. I'm
browser
just
screen
using
as
the
an
browser screen as
example.
an example,
But it could be a
but it could
smaller
be a
element
smaller
than the
element
browser
than the
screen.
browser screen.
And we're going to see
And
that
we're going to see that
tomorrow when we
tomorrow
start
when we
building
start
our
building
own
our own
project.
project.
So the background
So the
repeat
background
property
property
controls if
controls if
and how the
and
background
how the
image
background
repeats.
image repeats.
So we can use
So
this
we can use this
property to turn
property
off
to
the
turn off the
behavior or
behavior or
control this
control this
behavior. So
behavior. So
by default,
by default,
the image
the
repeats
image
both
repeats both
horizontally and
horizontally and
vertically.
vertically, and that is what you can basically see here.
It is repeating
It is
both
repeating both
horizontally.
horizontally.
You can see
You can see
it is
it is
repeating.
repeating.
We have
We
the
have
image
the image all the way to this part over here, and then from this part all the way to the other part it is repeating. That is horizontally. And even vertically it is repeating itself. So the image is starting from here all the way to here, and then from here all the way moving to the bottom, it's still repeating itself. So by default, that particular image repeats both horizontally and vertically. Okay, so with the background repeat property, the background repeat property will take following values to make sure, to control this particular behavior. So background repeat, you can pass repeat as the value, of which this is the default value. So you can see by default it is repeating itself. So sometimes maybe this is the behavior you want, especially when you're creating background patterns. Okay, sometimes, you know, okay, we are going to see that sometimes later on, but sometimes trying to create some background patterns. So in such a case, then you want maybe those patterns to repeat, then this repeat works perfectly fine. So when you pass repeat, this is the default value. The image is going to be repeated both horizontally and vertically. So this is the default value, so we don't need to look at it. Next, we have repeat X, which repeats only horizontally. Right now, as you can see, it is repeating both horizontally and vertically. So if we pass here, back repeat X, so background, repeat, and then we pass here, repeat X, the image will only be repeated horizontally. So if I refresh this now, you can see the image is only repeated horizontally, coming all the way from here to here, and then from here all the way to the end. So when we say background repeat X, then the image is only repeated horizontally. Next, we have repeat Y, whereby with repeat Y, the image repeats only vertically. So if I pass here background repeat and then I say repeat Y, the image will only be repeated vertically. So back to the page here, if I refresh it, you can now see the image is only being repeated vertically, not horizontally. And then now we have the next property here, which is not property but the value. The no repeat value prevents the image from repeating in either direction. Okay, so if you pass here background repeat and then I specify here no repeat like this, if I say no repeat, then the image will not be repeated either horizontally or vertically. It will just be placed like that and it will not be repeated. So that is the background repeat property, and that automatically tells you one thing, that the background repeat property, for the background repeat property to be used, you must have used this background image property somewhere. Okay, because if you're not using a background image somewhere, then what are you trying to repeat? Okay, so again, when an image is too small, or rather when an image is small, by default the browser will try to repeat that particular image both horizontally and vertically for it to fit the entire screen. I really wish this image over here would have loaded. Let me try to open this image on a new tab, that way you guys can see what I'm talking about. Okay, once it finishes loading, I'm going to give you guys a clearer picture. So yeah, you can see this is the vertical repetition. You can see we have these two dogs being repeated vertically. So that is the repeat X. And then we have repeat Y. It's not able to load because of internet issues. And then we have no repeat, where the background is not repeated at all. Next, we have background attachment. So the background attachment property determines whether the background scrolls with the page or stays fixed in place. Okay, so the background attachment property, it determines whether the background image, this image that you're using here in the background, whether it scrolls with the entire page or whether it stays in place. And we're going to see that in a short while. It has these two options. The first one is scroll, and that is the default option. So basically the background scrolls with the entire page. And then we have fixed, where the background basically stays in place while the entire page is scrolling. So let me show you what I'm talking about here. We can have here some multiple heading ones. Okay, I'm just trying to create some content in the page. That way we have something to scroll. So like we can just say here CSS, expand, and then I duplicate this multiple times. So again, I'm just creating content here for us to have something to scroll. So now if I refresh this page, you can see we have all of this. CSS is fun, CSS is fun, CSS is fun. Now, when I scroll, you can see the background is scrolling with the page. When I scroll the page, the background is scrolling with the page. Now, we have another property. The property we're looking at is the background attachment property. So back attach. So the background attachment property is used to control whether the background stays or rather whether it scrolls with the page. So the default value is scroll. That is why, as you were seeing, the background was scrolling with the page. But if I was to put this to fixed, so save the changes and refresh the page here. Okay. Now, when I scroll the page, you will notice that the background is just staying there. It's not moving. You can just make text to be white. Let's let us just make the H1 to have a white color. I'll save that and refresh it. So when I scroll, you will see that the background is just staying in the same place. Why it is bad? Because you can't see there at the bottom. Maybe red. So hash red, green, blue. So back to the page here. If I refresh it now, yeah. So when the entire page is scrolling, background is fixed like that. So that is the background attachment property set to fixed. Okay. So when you set background attachment property to fixed, then when the entire page is scrolling, the given background will just be staying there. It will not be scrolling. Okay. Okay. Let's just remove that. Okay, not there. So yeah, that is the background attachment property, which is basically to specify the starting position of the background image. So you can define it using the following keywords: have top, center, bottom, left, and right. So for that, let us go back to our original image here. So img.jpg. And then also let me remove all of these setting ones that we were having here for testing purposes. And yes, something like that. So if I save that and go back to the page here and refresh it, so this is our background image, as you can see. So the background position property is used to specify this. Oh, you can see. Let me share the screen again. Can you see my screen now? Is my screen visible? Okay, we have VSS and more, so let's just wait for a few seconds and see. Okay, but now can everyone see it? Can everyone see the screen? Okay, if it's yes, then let us continue. So, what I was saying here was something to do with the background position property. So the background position property, it specifies the starting position of the background image. Okay, so the background position property specifies the starting position of the background image. And you can define the background position property using the following keywords. We have top, center, bottom, left, and right. So let's do that so that you guys see what you're talking about. So right now, I want you to look at the image that we have here being rendered. I want you to look at this image, and I want you to look at what it is supposed to be looking like. Okay, so right now you can see the default position is kind of top. That is why we are seeing this these tubes here. Okay, that's why we're seeing these tubes, and then you're not seeing the chairs here at the bottom. That is because by default the position is top. And I think we also have that in our documentation. Okay, we don't have that, but let us now try to explore all of those. So background position, so back, pause for background position. If we go with top, I believe that is the default. And if we refresh our page, okay, you can see it is the top part that you are seeing here. The top part. Okay, where is that image? You can see it is the top part that you are seeing. So that is the background position property set to top. We can also go for bottom. Okay, so instead of top, we use bottom. And if I save that and refresh the image, you now see that the bottom part is the dominant part. So the bottom as well here, as you can see, so that you guys see I'm cheating. We have the chairs and so just a second. So, as you can see at the bottom, we have the chairs here and the floor, and that is the background position property set to bottom. And then we also have left. Okay, we also have left. So that is what is going to be shown dominantly here. So it's going to be these trees all the way to this tube over here at the top. So if I go back here and refresh it, that is exactly what we see. You can see the left part is the one that is now being shown dominantly. So that is left. And then we also have right like that. So if I save that, let us look at what we will see. So we will see these window panes and this right side basically. Okay,
So going back here
so
and
going back
refresh it,
and refresh it, you can now see that is exactly what you are talking about. So that is the background position property set to right. And then we also have center. So if I set that to center, so this center part here is the one that will be shown dominantly. So some parts of the chair, basically this center part over here. And now if I go back and refresh it, you can see what background position center looks like. Okay, so that is the background position property in CSS. And we have the center, top, right, and left. And by the way, you can also combine values. You can also combine multiple values, ones for vertical and horizontal. You can say here, for example, top, top left, like that. So the top left part is going to be dominant. So this top left part, this one here, is what is going to be shown dominantly. So going back here and refreshing it, you now see the top left part exactly as I told you guys. I can also say here top right, and now this part over here is the one that will be shown dominantly. So top right, of course we can't do top bottom because you can't combine two vertical directions. So if I refresh this, you can now see it is the top right that is being shown. Let us also try bottom right. If we go for bottom right, so it is this part over here that is going to be dominant. If we go for bottom right, this part here. So instead of top right, we go for bottom right. And if we refresh it, yeah, you can see exactly what I was telling you. And then of course, we also have left, where now this part is what will be shown dominantly. So depending on where the main subject of your image is, you are supposed to use various properties. So if I do here bottom left and I refresh it, you now see this part is the one that is being shown dominantly. So again, just have an idea of what the most dominant part of your page is, or not the most dominant part, but where the main character of your images,
Bro,
or rather on the image, just try
then
to
sinalipa
identify
ama
where the main
silipi?
part is,
Nalipa.
and then
Unajua hata
use
namba ya
this property over
caretaker?
here appropriately. So that is the background position property. The next one here that we have is the background size property. So the background size property defines the size of the background image. And here are the options that we have auto, which is the default, and this keeps the original size of the image. The auto property is the default one, and it keeps the original size of the image. The next one that we have is the cover property. So the cover property scales the image to cover the entire element. Even if the image is small, it will be scaled to cover the entire element. And then we have contain. The contain property fits the image within the element, maintaining its aspect ratio. So the contain property does its best to maintain the aspect ratio of the image. So let us try to look at them one by one. So the auto property here is the default, so we don't need to look at it because that is the default one. And for us to see what is happening, let us just comment this one out. And by the way, this is what a CSS comment looks like. Okay, it really looks like a C comment. So that is what a CSS comment looks like. So if we do here, background size. Okay, so you've seen auto default one. I can try here, for example, contain, and we've seen the contain property will try to maintain the aspect ratio of that particular image. Maybe we can try to put the image to the center here, background position center. That way we are able to see what is happening. Background position center. Yeah. So you can see that is the contain property. It does its best to maintain the aspect ratio of our image. Okay, you can see the chair has been cut out in the original image. Okay, in the original image, the chair is kind of cut out, this chair over here, and that is exactly what you also have here. So we also have another property here. So sorry, not property, but another value. Background size property, we set it to cover. And when I save that and refresh it, okay, you can now see it is, being stretched. The browser is going to stretch this image to fill the entire element, not the entire browser, to fill the entire element. It's only that in our case, the element itself is filling the entire browser. So background size cover is going to stretch the element to fill, it's going to stretch the image to fill the entire element. And that is why you guys are supposed to use high resolution images. So when you're going to download an image, make sure you download a high resolution image. I'm going to show you guys how to do it tomorrow, because right now, as you can see, this second image here, this IMG2, it's very small. So you can imagine what happens when I force it to cover the entire page, or rather to cover the entire element. So if I save that and refresh it, you see it is it's extremely low quality. In fact, it's hurting our eyes. It's extremely low quality, right? So compare that with this other image here, which is a bit bigger and a bit higher quality with higher resolution. If we refresh it, you see it's looking nicer than the other one. Okay, so that is the background. Okay, we can even try to go crazier here. That way you guys see what I'm talking about. If I go to downloads here and I try to copy this chip, of course it's an extremely small image here. Okay, so if we try to use here /chip.png, so we're now forcing this chip to cover the entire element. We're now forcing the chip to cover the entire element, and when we refresh it, you can see how we end up having a very ugly thing in our case. Okay, this is extremely ugly, and we never want to be in such a design. So whenever you want to use an image, if the image is going to be used in a very large space, by the way, this is not to say that you should always be downloading big images, because even big images, they're going to hurt the performance of your website. Okay, so only download a big image if it's going to be used in a very big place. So for example, in the hero section of a landing page, we're going to see that tomorrow as we build our own project, and other places, or other relevant places. If the image is going to be used in a small part, then download a small sized image, of course, to take care of the performance of your website. But I hope you guys will get the idea behind this background size property. And also, okay, let us go back to the original image here. img.jpg. So you can also use percentage values for this image, for the background size. So I can say here, for example, background size, if I do 100%, that is similar to saying cover. Okay, so 100% is similar to saying background size cover. But if I try to use something like, let's say 60% here, so background size 60%, and I refresh the page here, you now see what is happening. Okay, if I try to use something like, let's say 20% for the background size, okay, refresh that, you now see what ends up happening. So you can also use percentage value for your background size property. And ladies and gentlemen, those are the background properties, right? We have the background color for putting a color behind a background. We have the background image if you want to work with images in your background. We have the background repeat property, which specifies whether a background should be repeated both vertically and horizontally. We have the background attachment property, which specifies whether a background image scrolls with the rest of the page. We have the background position property, which specifies the dominant part of the image to be shown. And then we have the background size property, which specifies the size of the background. Any questions up to that point? Any questions? Okay, that's it. Let us look at the next one. So this background shorthand, it's a bit weird. Okay, so this background shorthand is like okay, you know what, we can actually leave it. Let us look at CSS gradients. Okay, so I want us to look at CSS gradients, and while that is happening, so we will come back to advanced selectors later on. So while that is happening, we can be loading the text formatting part of CSS. Now, gradients are a type of background in CSS that allow for smooth transitions between colors. Okay, so gradients are a type of background. So gradients, again, they are a type of background in CSS that allows for smooth transition between colors. So gradients can be used to apply background effects of an element without the need for an external image. And the gradients in CSS, they are declared using the background property or the background image property. Don't use the background color property. Whenever you want to work with a gradient, use the background or the background image and not the background color. Now in CSS, we have three major types of gradients. We have the linear gradient, the radial gradient, and the conic gradient. Let us start with the first one here, which is the linear gradient. So linear gradient transitions colors along a straight line. And guys are going to see this in a short while. And you can optionally define the direction, for example, to right, to bottom left, and specify multiple color stops. Okay, and this is how you do it. You use the background property. And by the way, of course, if you want to work with a gradient, with a color gradient, you must have at least two colors. So background, and then you use linear gradient, and then you pass in here. You start with the direction, of which the direction is optional, but you specify your first color stop, your second color stop, all the way to your last color stop. Let us do that with our body here. So I'm going to do here background, okay, not background color. Remember, it's either background or background image whenever you want to work with gradients. So the first gradient you're looking at is the linear gradient. So you're supposed to use this linear gradient function, and then here you pass as many colors as you want. So I can pass here, for example, red, green, and let's say blue. So if I save that and I refresh the page here, okay, you can now see we have a gradient here. We have red, green, blue, and then we have red, green, blue, and then we have red, green, blue, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that is the linear gradient property. As you can see, we have our colors there. And of course, you need at least two colors. Let us see what happens if we try to create a gradient with one color. Okay, so you can see if you try to create a gradient with one color, well, you should have just used then the background color property instead of going through all of this hassle. But if you want a gradient with multiple colors, you can specify as many as you want. So red, green, fuchsia, purple, okay, magenta, and so on and so forth. So if I save that and I refresh this page, you can see we end up having this ugly thing, but it contains that gradient: red, green, fuchsia, magenta, purple, red, green, fuchsia, magenta, purple, and so on and so forth. So for this, to make things simple, let us just go with red, maybe green, and let's say orange or something. So save that, and if I come back here and refresh it, you see we have red, green, orange, and so on and so forth. And then we have said you can also specify the direction. And if you want to specify the direction, that is what you start with in this linear gradient function. So instead of starting with red, I can start here with the direction. You specify to wherever your direction is. So for example, to the right, and then red, green, orange, for example. So save that, and if I refresh this, you see it's going to the right, red, green, and then orange. I can also say it's supposed to start from the right, going all the way to the left. So to left, and if I refresh this, you now see it's starting from the left, from the right going to the left. So starting from the right, going to the left, red, green, and orange. Sorry, because again we have specified here to the left. I can also specify here to the top, so to top, and if I save that and refresh it, you'll now see we are starting from the bottom going all the way to the top. Okay, and then I can also specify here to the bottom, of which I think that is the default one, where it starts from the top going all the way to the bottom. So if I refresh this, you see it starts from top to the bottom. And then of course you can also specify diagonal directions. So I can say here, for example, to the bottom right. So to bottom right, and when I refresh this, you now see we have this sort of a diagonalish colors going to the bottom right. Okay, you can even say to the bottom left, like that. And if we save that and refresh it, you now see we have this diagonal like colors going to the bottom left. Okay, and then we can also say to top right, for example. To top, basically it is just going to be the same thing as you're seeing here, but now going to the top. Okay, so that is the linear gradient property. And then again, remember, I'm supposed to use either the background property or the background image property for a linear gradient to work. So if I come back here and refresh it, you will see it is still working. Don't try to use a background color. I think it's going to break. Okay.
So
If we try to use the background color property, as you can see here, it's not going to work quite fine. You see it's going to break. Okay, so you should always make sure that you use the background or the background image property wherever you want to work with images in your background. Next we have the next we have our radial gradient. So that is the linear gradient. And then next we have the, okay, before radial gradient, let us look at the repeating linear gradient. So we can also create repetition for patterns. We can also create repetition patterns for linear gradient using repeating linear gradient. Okay, so for that we only add one more parameter here. Rather, we add one more argument to this repeating linear gradient function. And as you can see, we're not putting a comma. And that argument is after how long are we repeating this? After how long are we doing a repetition? So here, for example, we can say, just a second, we can say repeating linear gradient, and then you can just have here red and green. For example, maybe red, green, and orange. And then you can say here the repetition. Notice I'm not putting a comma. Okay, you can notice I'm not putting a comma. So I can say here the repetition is supposed to be after every 40 pixels. Okay. So if I come back here and refresh it, you'll now see after every 40 pixels, we are repeating. So 40 pixels, and then the repetition starts after every 40 pixels. Okay, and then of course you can also specify the direction. You can say, for example, to bottom right. So if I save that and I refresh this, you see the repetition is now going to the bottom right. Okay, to the bottom right, and that is working perfectly fine. So that is the repeating linear gradient. Next, we have another one here called the radial gradient. So the radial gradient transition colors outwards in a circular elliptical pattern from a central point. So that is what the radial gradient does. It transition colors outwards in a circular or elliptical pattern from a central point. So here we can say, instead of this linear gradient, we can say radial gradient, and then, for example, orange, red, green, something like that. So if I save this, we're now going to have a very nice pattern here that is circular. Okay, as you can see, we have orange. Okay, well, how are we going? Orange and then red and then green. Yeah, exactly. So orange here in the middle. So it looks like a sun. Orange in the middle, and then red, and then green outside. So orange, red in the middle, and then green. So that is the repeating linear gradient. Okay, so you can see, there we go. But then let us just give our body a height. That way we don't keep getting those weird repetitions. Maybe, I don't know, 900 pixels. Okay, I'm not happy how it is repeating like this. It's a bit confusing. Yeah, so this is the radial gradient. We can even change it further. Maybe 400 pixels is going to work for now. Yeah, so you can see here is our radial gradient. So 400 pixels. You know what, I'll just use here a value you've never seen, but don't worry, we will come back to that. We'll come back to learn what VH is in a short while. So if I save that here, so this is the perfect example I wanted. So you can see here we have our radial gradient. So you can also specify the shape for the radial gradient. Okay, so you can also specify the shape for your radial gradient, either ellipse, circle, and the default is ellipse. You can see the default is ellipse. That is why it's looking like an oval. So here we don't have a direction because I don't see how you're going to use the direction circle, but you can change the shape. So the default one is ellipse, but you can, for example, make it a circle and so on and so forth. So I can say here, for example, circle, and then orange, red, green. And if I come back here and refresh it, you now see we have a circle here. So we have our orange, and then red, and then green at the very outside. And then after that, we also have the repeating radial gradient. So here, as you can see, we are also specifying the value, okay? And notice we're not putting a comma when specifying after how long are we repeating. So let us just have here, repeating radial grade. So after green, no comma, we're not putting any comma, and then you can just have here 50 pixels. So if we save that, go back to our page and refresh it, you will now see this thing here, okay? So after every 50 pixels, the repetition starts. We now start orange, red, and then green. And then after another 50 pixels, yeah. Okay, so orange, red, green, and then a new repetition for the next 50 pixels. After that, a new repetition for the next 50 pixels, and so on and so forth. So that is the repeating radial gradient. Yes, yeah, that is what I was looking for. Repeating radial gradient. At your own time, you can go check the conic gradient. It's also an interesting one. So you can also go look at the conic gradient later on. Any questions up until that point? Any questions? Okay, so if you don't have any questions, so here I really want you guys to pay attention, because this is another part where this is another CSS, let me just say another part where, you know, the CSS that we learn here you'll be using on an almost daily basis. So I want us to look at some various CSS text formatting properties. Okay, and the first one here is the color property. Of course, you're not new to that one. Let me just get rid of everything that we have here, and then I want some dummy text here. So a paragraph with lorem, let's say 500. So 500 dummy characters. So save that, and if we go back to our page here and refresh it, okay, I did not save this. Save and refresh. Yeah, so we have 500 dummy characters here. Okay, so the first property I want us to learn is the color property. So the color property in CSS is used to set the color of text, and it is one of the most fundamental and widely used properties for styling web pages. So I don't think we need to go through that. So let us just target that paragraph using the element selector, and then you can give it a color. Let's say something like orange. So you're targeting the paragraph and you're giving it that orange color. And if I refresh it, you see our text is orange in color. Okay, so our text is now orange in color. So that is the first property that you need to understand, the color property. And then of course you can also use HSL, you can also use RGB, you can also use RGBA. So that is the color property. Next we have the text align property. So the text align property is used to control the horizontal, listen, the horizontal alignment of text, not the vertical alignment of text. There's another one for controlling the vertical alignment of text. So we're talking about here the horizontal alignment of text. Now the values for the text align property are, we have left, which aligns our text to the left. We have right, which aligns our text to the right. We have center, which centers the text horizontally. And then we have justify, which spreads the text evenly, aligning both left and right edges. Okay, so here, if I do text align like that, I can start with, let's say, something like, by the way, the default is, I believe, left. So the default is left. So if I save that and I try to refresh here, you will see nothing is happening. The text is just aligned to the left here. You can see it is aligned to the left, and then it is not evenly aligned here to the right. I want you to look at the right. It is not evenly aligned to the right. So if you want, you can change that behavior and change this from left to right. So if I save that and refresh this page, you'll now see the text is evenly aligned in the right, but it is not evenly aligned in the left. Okay. Next, we have text align center. So center align text. So if we refresh that, you can see the center alignment for text. So it's like trying to strike a balance between the left and the right. Okay, and then we have another one here, which is justify align. So if we set here text align justify and refresh our page here, you'll now see it is trying to it's perfectly aligned to the left and also perfectly aligned to the right. But guys, you can see we have this last line of text here that is very stubborn. It's not aligned as we want. You can see it is aligned to the left. Okay, so it's a bit annoying, as you can see, and that is why the CSS team sat down and gave us the next property, and that is the text align last property. So the text align last property specifies the alignment of the last line of text, and then we can also pass these values left, right, justify, and center. So the text align last property specifies the alignment of the last line of text. This one over here, this last line of text here. Okay, so we can set here text align last, and then we can set here, for example, center. So if I save that and I refresh the page here, you can now see it has been aligned to the center. I can also set here text align last to right, and when I go back to the page here and I refresh it, you now see it will be aligned to the right. Okay, I can also set here left. Sorry for that. I can also set here left, of which, okay, the left is the default one, so no need for that one. And then, of course, now where we actually needed it was for the justify one. So usually when you justify your text, the last line is a bit stubborn. You can see we have justified our text, but this last line over here, it's proving to be troublesome. So CSS has an algorithm. When you use this text align last justify, it has an algorithm to just put some empty spaces between the last line of text for it to be justify aligned. So now if I refresh the page, you can see exactly what I'm telling you. The last line of text, it is justify aligned. Okay, so CSS is throwing in there some spaces to make this work. Okay, the next one here, yeah, we've seen all of that. The next one is the text transform property. So the text transform property is used to control the capitalization of text. So the values are none, of which this is the default. So there is no transformation when you use none. Basically, the text will appear as you wrote it. We have capitalize. So capitalize will transform the first letter of each word to uppercase. We have uppercase, which transforms all text to uppercase, and then we have lowercase, which transform all the text to lowercase. So for that, we can just have here a heading 1 to easily see that. So story of my life. So save that. And here we have our heading 1. Let us start by aligning it to the center. So text align center. I hope you guys, you know that at least. And if I refresh the page, of course, the story of my life is not at the center. Now, if I want to make this to be in uppercase, I'm going to use the text transform property set to uppercase. So text transform, set that to uppercase. And when I save that and I refresh it here, you can see that is in uppercase. By the way, the default value is none. Okay, so the default value is none. And when we have none, you can see the text basically appears as we typed it. And then we have uppercase, which, of course, as you have seen, it converts all the characters in your text to uppercase. Okay, next we have lowercase, which will transform all the text to lowercase. And then, are we forgetting another one? And then, yeah, we have capitalize. So capitalize will transform the first letter of each word to uppercase. So S will be in uppercase, O in uppercase, M in uppercase, and L in uppercase. So if we say here, text transform capitalize, save that, and we refresh our page, you will see that S is now in uppercase, O in uppercase, M in uppercase, and L in uppercase. So that is now working exactly as we wanted it to. Okay. So uppercase, lowercase, yeah. Now next we have the text decoration properties. You will notice I've said properties. So the text decoration properties, they are used to set the appearance of decorative lines on the text. And for that, I'm still going to use our heading 1 here. this story of my life. So the text decoration property is used to set the appearance of a decorative line on a text. So if there is anything to do with a line anywhere on the text, then CSS is giving us this property called text decoration. And it is a shorthand for the following properties: text decoration line, text decoration color, text decoration style, and text decoration thickness. So this text decoration, it is a shorthand for all of these properties. And I'm going to show you what we mean by a shorthand. Now, let us start with the first one here, the text decoration line. So this text decoration line specifies the type of line that you want to apply on the text. The values are, the first one here is none, of which this is the default one. So there is no decoration. There is no line anywhere. We have underline. I don't need to explain that. We have overline. I don't need to explain that. And then we have line through. I don't need to explain that as well. So let's set here text decoration, of which by default is none. That is why we don't have any line. But I can set here underline. Okay. So if we can just show here our preview. If I set here underline, that is what underline will look like. If I set here overline, that is what overline will look like. And if I set here line through, that is what line through will look like. So by now, guys, you can now see we can now drop the INS HTML tag and the SHTML tag and even the UHTML tag for underlining. So yesterday we saw the INS tag for underlining text in HTML. We also saw the U tag for underlining text. So you can now see we can now safely drop those two tags. And when I say dropping them, I mean dropping them. Okay, if you don't want to write any CSS, okay, you can use those tags. But if you're going to have CSS somewhere, there is no need to use those tags anymore. So we also had the DEL tag for striking through text like this. And then you also had the S tag for striking through text like this. So now we can safely drop those two tags thanks to CSS. So for now, I think it makes sense to have this to be underline. Okay, so that is our text decoration property set to underline. Now the next one here is, okay, so that is the text decoration line, okay, which specifies whether we are going to have a line or not. So we have underline, overline, and line through. Next, oh yeah, actually this is what we have. This is none, overline, underline, and line through. Okay, so the next one here, is the text decoration color. So the text decoration color property, it specifies the color of the line applied to the text. So text decoration color, okay, so text decoration color, it specifies the color of the line that you're applying to that particular piece of text. So in this case, you can see by default is going to work with the color of your text. So by default, if your text is red in color, then the line is going to be red in color. So let me just show you what I'm talking about. If I give our text here a color of, let's say, crimson, then you will see even the line is going to have the crimson color. If I give it a purple color, just a second, if I give it a purple color, you'll see even the line is going to have a purple color. But you can change that behavior using the text decoration color. So I can say here, text decoration color, for example, something like brown, and now you can see the underline here is brown in color. Okay, I can even try to put here something like red, and then I can also use the RGB and RGBA as we had learned in the morning. Okay, so I can decide, for example, to use RGB, RGBA, HSL, HSLA, whichever one you guys want. So the text decoration color will set the color of that particular line. So we can go here, for example, with something like red, or maybe to just match our story here, we will go with orange. Okay, so that is very straightforward there, nothing too complicated there. So that is the text decoration color. Text decoration color, we've seen that. Next, we have the text decoration style. So the text decoration style, it will define the style of that particular line, of which we have solid as the default one. Okay, so solid is the default one. You can see solid being the default one. And then you can also have here double, dotted, dashed, and wavy. Okay, so let us try to do that here. Text decoration line. Okay, so solid is the default one, as you can see, but if I want, I can have dotted. Oh, sorry, not text decoration line. It's supposed to be text decoration style. Text decoration line was here. Sorry for that, guys. Text decoration line was here. So text decoration style, you can see I'm using dotted, and now this is dotted underlined. I can go here for dashed, and as you can see, that is going to be dashed. Okay, I can go for double, and now you can see we have double underlining here. So that is the text decoration line. Which one am I forgetting? So solid, yeah, double, dotted, dashed, and wavy. Let us try to use wavy, and now you can see our text is wavy underlined like that, and that is working perfectly fine. So text decoration style, it's going to define the style of your text decoration line. Yeah, that is it about it. And then the next one here, there's still one we've not covered. That is supposed to be text decoration thickness. Yeah, exactly. So the text decoration thickness is going to set the thickness of the decoration line. Okay, so text decoration thickness is going to it is going to set the thickness of the decoration line, and we can pass this value, for example, in pixels. I can say, for example, 50 pixels, just a crazy value for you guys to see what is going to happen. 50 pixels, and you can see our line here is very thick. That doesn't make any sense. Let us go here with 5 pixels, and for that, let us just use solid, the default one, instead of that wavy one. So if I try to go for 15 pixels, you will see our line is even thicker, maybe 25 pixels, even more thicker. If we go for 35 pixels, even thicker than what we had previously. Okay, so that is the text decoration thickness. Let us go here with a value that makes sense, maybe something like 5 pixels. Okay, so that is the text decoration thickness. And now we get to the shorthand here. So we now have this text decoration. Where is that? We now have this text decoration shorthand. Yeah. So this text decoration shorthand, it combines the above properties for compact declarations. So sometimes you want to underline your text and make it wavy and all of that. The text decoration property will allow you to do that without writing all of these lines of CSS. So for example, right now, I can replace all of these lines, okay, by using this text decoration, okay, and then just pass this value in whatever order you want. So for example, I can say here, I want this to be red, underline, okay, or for example, red overline, 5 pixels, maybe wavy or something. So red overline 5 pixels. So if you can pass this in whatever order you want, and you can see with that, we can eliminate all of these properties here. So red overline, or we can even say here red underline, 5 pixels wavy, and you'll see it's working perfectly fine. Just pass them in whatever order you want. Okay. So most of the times you'll just see people going with this one here, text decoration underline, and you'll see it will still work perfectly fine. If you want, you can also change the thickness, for example, 5 pixels like that. You can even make it double for the style, okay? And you can even change the color, something like red or green, or even use the RGBA. Sorry. Maybe even use the hash, all the red, remove the green and remove the blue, and you see it's working perfectly fine. So most of the times you'll see people do this, and when you see that, don't be surprised and start wondering what is happening here. So for now, I'll just go with underline 5 pixels double, and that should be more than enough. Okay, we are moving well. The next property here is going to be, yes, ask the question. Okay, I make it a single line. So I remove the double, yes. to the text.
Yeah.
Change that. Yeah, I think there's a property. I'm not sure if it is text decoration offset. Text decoration offset. Yeah, you can see it's text underline offset. Yeah, there's a property for that. Thank you for asking that question. So what he is asking is, as you can see here, the line is very close to the text itself. So what do you do if you want the line to be a bit, away from the text? So I think it is this property. You can use the text underline offset property and then provide a value like, let's say, 20 pixels, and now you can see the line is being pushed to the bottom. Have I answered your question? Yeah, so you use the text underline offset to change the distance between the text itself and the underline and the line. Yeah, and then let us try to see what overline will do. Okay, so for overline it will not work. I think it only works for underline, and that is because of this the design of these letters. Because you can see, if you don't put this offset over here, then you will notice that let me just bring the underline back. If you don't put that offset, you will notice that these letters, they are disturbing the line itself. Okay, so to avoid disrupting the line, we have this property, text underline offset, which you can use to push the line away from the text a bit. And as you can see, it's working perfectly fine. Okay, even if you go for 420 pixels, you can see it has really been pushed all the way to the bottom there, and it's working perfectly fine. So that is the property that you can use. So thank you for that question. Next, we have the text indent property. So this text indent property, it defines the indentation of the first line of text in a block. So you guys, know how books and even magazines and the print media usually look like. Basically, the first line of a paragraph is usually a bit indented, and not all the way to the end. So for that, you can use the text indent property. So if I do here text indent, let's say something like 20 pixels, you will see that the text is indented some 20 pixels from the left. I can even try to do here 60 pixels, and you will see the text is indented 60 pixels from the left. Okay, and if you don't believe me, we can just try to refresh that from the browser here. I don't know why my computer is behaving like this. Yeah, so you can see this is the text indent property to create that sort of indentation of that part of the first line of text. So if you really want to have a paragraph, you can use that text indent property. Next, we have the letter spacing property. And of course, as you've already heard the name, that letter spacing property is used to control the spacing between characters in a text. Okay, so sometimes our letters are just too close to each other. So you can see, for example, here, these characters, they are just too close to each other. So the letter spacing property controls the spacing between those characters in a text. So it's very simple. You will use the letter spacing property and then provide a value that makes sense. Let us use that on the heading 1 here. Okay, maybe somewhere here at top, we can do a letter spacing of, let's say, 2 pixels. And now you see we have some nice spaces between our letters. If you guys don't believe me, we can just try to go crazy here, something like 12 pixels. And now you see we have even more spaces between our letters, right? Still don't believe me? Let us just try here something like 52 pixels. And now you see the even crazier spaces between our letters. So of course, go for a value that makes sense. I think 2 pixels here, in this case, is far much okay. Yeah, so that is the letter spacing property. And even on our paragraph here, for the story of our life, we can use the letter spacing property, something like maybe 2 pixels, and that is still going to be far much okay. I think it's better seen in the browser here. If we refresh it, yeah, you can now see how the letter spacing is now bringing this to life and making it easier for us to read. And then after that, we have the line height property. Of course, you've already guessed it. The line height property controls the distance between 2 lines of text. Okay, so for the value, a good practice is to use a unitless number. By the way, not even a good practice. This is the syntax. I'm going to change this when I get time. For the value, we're supposed to use a unitless number. You can see I'm putting here 2 pixels or 2% or 2 whatever units it is. I'm just putting here 2, and then it's a ratio. Okay, you just put here a value, a unitless number. So what is going to happen is that this particular value over here is going to be multiplied by the font size of that particular element to get a suitable line height. Let me show you what I'm saying here. I don't know what the size, I don't know what the font size of this text is, but when I do here a line height of something like 2, then the way that CSS calculates this line height, okay, the way that CSS calculates, by the way, you can see what line height looks like. Let me just first of all start by commenting it out. Okay, if I refresh the page, I want you to notice the difference between now and when I refresh this page. The text are, the lines are so close to each other, making it hard for us to read. But if I bring back here our text, or rather our line height, you now see we have a line between our text. So the thing is that what I was trying to say is this: for this space here, for this space in the line height, the way CSS calculates that particular space, the way CSS calculates that space is that it will multiply this value that you supply here. That is why I'm telling you, you supply a ratio value. When I say a ratio value, I'm basically meaning a unitless value. So CSS is going to multiply the font size of this element, or rather the font size of that particular piece of text, with this value over here to get the space here. Okay, it's going to do that to get the space here. And if you don't believe me, okay, we will learn this font size property, but let us just try to put here a font size of, let's say, 48 pixels. And you will notice when I increase the font size, even the spacing between increases, and that is thanks to that multiplication, or rather to that algorithm. So CSS multiplies the font size of your element with that ratio to get this height over here from one line to another. That is what we mean by the line height property. So of course, 48 pixels for a paragraph doesn't make any sense. I was just doing that for demonstration purposes. And then the last important property that you will learn when it comes to CSS text formatting is the word spacing property, which specifies the spacing between words in a text. I think that explains itself. I don't need even to go through it. If I do here a word spacing of, let's say, 20 pixels, a very crazy value, you can see we have 20 pixels of space between words. And I can even decide to, if you guys don't believe me, you can try to go here with something crazy, maybe 220 pixels. And now you see from one word to another, the distance is 220 pixels. Of course, just to go for something that makes sense, don't do madness here, but you can see from one word to another is 220 pixels, 220 pixels, and so on and so forth. Okay, so maybe we can just go with, I don't know, maybe 2 pixels. I think 2 pixels is going to be okay. And actually, you don't even have to use that because by default, the word spacing is just fine, unless you have some very crazy customizations that you want to do. So those, boys and girls, are the most important CSS properties that you are going to work with. Sorry, not CSS properties, but CSS text formatting properties that you're going to work with. Any questions up to this point? So in the afternoon, we're going to start from here. But before we go, maybe we can just look at the font size property, because we've been using it all the time. I think we've been using it to an extent that by now you know what the font size property does. Okay, so the font size properties is used to control the size of text on a web page. This font size property, it is used to control the size of text on a web page, and for the value, it can take a custom value such as 24 pixels or one of the following keywords. So X small to mean extremely small text, X small to mean slightly smaller than this one, and then we have small for standard small text, medium, large, extra large, and extra extra large. So let us look at that. And for that, we're going to use this heading 1. So we've said that, okay, let us just bring this guy back to existence. So you've said for the font size property, you can use any custom value. For example, I don't know, 72 pixels. By the way, I like using multiples of 8. Okay, we will discuss that later on. That is why, by the way, you will notice most of the time, when people go beyond 8, they usually use multiples of 8 when they are working with values in CSS. You will see 16 pixels, 24 pixels, 32 pixels, 48 pixels, 56 pixels, okay, 64 pixels, 72 pixels. So most of the time people like going with the values of, or rather with the multiples of 8. So even here, I'll just use 72 pixels, but we will discuss that later on. So you can see when I say font size 72 pixels, I'm able to change the font size of this element. Okay, and I can also use custom values, the ones that we've seen. I can go, for example, for extra small, and you can see we have a very tiny text there at the top. Okay, I can also go for X small, which means extra small. I can also go for small, like that. And then after small, we have medium, like that. And then we have large, like that. And then we have extra large. I hope you guys are seeing the differences. And then we have XX large, like that. So you can use a custom value like 24 pixels, 32 pixels, whatever pixels. If your dad is 56 years old, you can use 56 pixels. It's entirely up to you. But we also have this inbuilt keywords, especially if you want some sort of consistency. You can also use this inbuilt keywords for the font size. Boys and girls, do you have any question or questions? Okay, we can break for lunch, but tuko tumerudi hapa by 2. Sawa sawa? Yeah, by 2 p.m. tutakuwa, by latest to 10 tutakuwa tumeanza. And by the way, we will be using the same Google Meet. Whenever we are about to have a Google Meet meeting, we'll be using the same link. Sawa sawa? Are we together, guys? Yeah, so anytime you hear me saying, let us switch to Google Meet, I'm basically talking about that URL. Just that is the URL we'll be using. I'll not be creating any new URLs. We'll be using that one for the rest of this bootcamp. That is when we're having Google Meet meetings. But as soon as the internet stabilizes and Microsoft Teams is able to work with it, then we will switch back to Microsoft Teams.